Okay, hello and good evening. This is the August 3rd, 2020 regularly scheduled school committee meeting of East Long Meadow. It is 6 p.m. I'll call the meeting to order. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts' March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. And we have the full committee in attendance this evening. And that's all I have to say about that. Okay, so let's move. Actually, I'd like to entertain a motion to modify our agenda. If we could bring up 6.1 to our next order of business, please.
So moved.
Okay, so moved.
Motion's been made by Bill.
Second.
Second by Beth. Discussion. Hearing none, all's in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0. Okay, so we have a course proposal for Birchland Park to discuss.
Okay. Heather, did you want to introduce that?
Sure. Civic Engagement and Action is a course that I know Dr. Allen has sent information to all of you beforehand. So I can say a little bit about it and answer any questions before you make any decisions. The idea of this class is that they do have a civics class in 8th grade, but they don't have any formal opportunities really to discuss current events or really think about themselves as part of a civic community until then. So the idea is for this class for students, it's very much of a dialogue-based class. They're using curriculum from developmental designs. And so the students will have an opportunity to really build community, explore identity, look at diversity and inclusion, look at how we're all interconnected, start to look and talk about injustices that happen around them and what they can do about it. So it's kind of the whole gamut. It's very much dialogue based, and it really will also, in addition to the civics, support a lot of our social emotional standards as well.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to look over the description of the course?
Yep.
Heather, what are we calling the course again? I'm sorry.
Civic Engagement and Action.
Yep.
All right. I think it's great. I think it's, we've always been talking about how we don't have enough civics within the school system anyways. And I think that it's nice to have something where the kids can talk about timely topics and how they fit into society. And I think it's wonderful.
A lot of the curriculum too is about creating a safe place for them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And how does it?
Sorry, go ahead.
How does it fit into the schedule? I know there's a line in here that says, in addition, this class will allow our schedule to function next year. What is it either replacing or
So this
how is it working in?
This is going to become one of the specials and or electives that people rotate through if they are interested in taking it. And this would allow, I believe, Heather, if I'm correct, 8th graders to rotate as part of their specials courses. They would be able to rotate through that.
6th graders, right?
6.
The 6th grade, I'm sorry, 6th graders.
Okay.
Yep. And so it balances out. If you remember, as part of our budget reductions, we had reduced a literacy print media special, which was more or less a support literacy group. And so that course has been taken out, and this course now would take its place.
Is there any kind of connection from the 6th grade curriculum to the 8th grade curriculum? Like, is it a first part and then?
So the 8th grade curriculum is very much traditional civics, where they learn about government and how it's organized, the branches of government. And so then they tie things into current events. This would be more of an opportunity for the students to have a means to have conversations that they probably would love to have, but they don't necessarily feel safe or have the tools. So it will definitely build into that 8th grade class while they talk about controversial subjects, and they'll bring up Supreme Court cases, but it won't be as formal as that because it is an elective. So a lot of it is, like I said, dialogue-based, game-based simulations to create like a fun, safe environment.
She's a fantastic teacher, the librarian. I'm going to mess up her name. Ms. Cintron Cordova. She's just brought life into the library. The kids are very engaged with her. I know I was very impressed when I met her last year when the kids were doing their projects, and I think she's the perfect person for this too.
Has she received any professional development on leading this course?
Yes, so she's attending a 4-day virtual because of the situation, but it's a 4-day workshop with developmental designs.
Okay, any other discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the Birchland Park Middle School introduction of the civic engagement in action class.
I'll move to accept the new course at Birchland Park Middle School called Civic Engagement and Action.
Motion has been made by Beth,
Second?
seconded by Sarah. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in-
It was Antonella who seconded.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just so you
Thank
know,
you.
that's okay. Yep.
Second by Antonella. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can offer up an opportunity. Is there, would anybody like to make any committee or subcommittee communication comments at this time?
I wish we were discussing dress code tonight instead of what we're talking about, but there we go.
I would just acknowledge that I really appreciate how many families have reached out over the past 2 weeks. I would say that I've received countless emails and a number of phone calls, and families are really willing to engage in this conversation about the health and education of their students. So I just appreciate their honesty and their candidness, and they're willing to call and have their opinions be heard. And I just want to publicly say thank you for that, and that I hope that open line of communication continues as we move forward.
I'd also like to, I attended the high school graduation. Yeah, well, all of us did. I just wanted to say how nice it was, how well organized it was. And I think all the families and the students really appreciated it, having that opportunity to go through the ceremony and walk and get their diploma.
Yeah, given everything that happened, I give, a great deal of credit to Frank Page and his staff and everyone that was involved. I echo Antonella's sentiments exactly.
Okay, thank you all. And so continuing on a theme, Sarah's theme of participation and input from the community in our meetings, we have an opportunity for visitors to address the committee. As you all know, we have a big discussion this evening. So what I'd like to do is open it up to anyone who'd like to make a public comment at this time, as later on when we have our discussion on what to do this school year, we won't have a chance for opportunity for discussion at that point. So if anyone is out in the audience that would like to speak at this point, please raise your hand.
Click allow.
Okay, we have one hand up. If we could pull them in, please.
Oh, it was Catherine or Beckett?
Catherine.
Okay.
Hey, folks, thanks for taking this time to make this difficult decision. I just want to weigh in as a parent of a 4th grader at Maple Shade.
Catherine,
yeah.
Catherine, you mind just stating your name and your address just for the record, please?
Of course, my name is Catherine Dugan. I live at 9 Shaw Street in East Long Meadow. Maple Shade is where my kid goes to school. I emailed many of you, so I'll just say this for the record. But I really am hoping that this committee can make a good, thoughtful decision about how to move to fully remote as soon as possible. I think the quicker we can make the decision, the better prepared we can all be. I say this as a professor and someone who is equally in the midst of trying to navigate what the fall looks like. And the sooner that we can make a decision, the better we can come up with how to make a terrible plan amid only terrible options. And I think that the only way we can really know what to do is to keep everybody home remote. I will also say this, I say this as a single mom with no family in the area, working a more than full-time job. So I fully recognize the challenges of childcare, but I still think this is the best choice for our community, for our health, and for our teachers and for our kids. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
I see my friend Beckett out there.
Hold on one sec.
Beckett, you're on mute if you want to come off mute and give us.
There we go. All right. My name's Beckett Vigno, the 9th grade at East Long Meadow High School, 397 Pease Road, East Long Meadow. In regards, if I'd like to make a couple of comments to the committee about if going back to school, I'd say we probably have to do a remote option because if we were going to do hybrid, there'd be some bus equity issues, not providing transportation 7 through 12 and then less than 2 miles away from the school in K through 6, I think is going to be a big issue. Aging schools, that's 3 of our schools that lack adequate ventilation. That's another thing I think we need to think about when we're going to have kids wearing masks. And then on 7/31 Friday, Governor Baker talked about large gatherings causing outbreaks, and that was only 90 to 170 people. So I think the committee would really have to think about that going back to school if we did a hybrid option. So I think the best option would be remote.
Okay, Beckett, thank you for your input. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you still may have one hand up.
Yeah, I see Tom. Tom, you're on mute if you want to come off.
Good evening, Tom K, 265 Millbrook Drive. One question I have, if we do go to hybrid model, how will we address the AP honors in the courses where we have a small amount of students?
Gordon, you want
Want me to answer that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So with the AP classes, honors classes, and really all classes, there will, in a hybrid model, both be in-person instruction as well as remote instruction on Wednesday for all students. And on the off days, there would be a variety of instruction and so forth. But one of the things, obviously, with the AP classes, all of our grade levels and teachers will be using a management system of some sort. Google Classroom would be an example of this. And so they would, our AP teachers most likely would be setting up their in-person instruction by providing a certain amount of information, videos, and so forth to keep those students on track. Because I think to your point, Mr. K, there's a timeline, obviously, with AP courses, given that they take those exams in the early spring. And so they have to stay on track. And I think our high school teachers will be up to the challenge to keeping them on track.
Thank you. Will
Sure.
other courses be offered, all the same courses?
We are planning on offering all the courses that we offer in the regular program of studies. If for some reason something was unable to run, we are also at the high school level. We have purchased some software in a program called Edgenuity, and I think they're going to be using some of that to bolster some of the content in some of our courses, as well as using that as a possible complete opt-out platform should the district go to a hybrid model, but students or families make a decision that they want to opt out. This would provide a structure for them to do so. I don't know, Heather, if I hit all the points on Edgenuity.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tom, for your inquiries tonight. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment? Kimberly, you're on mute if you want to come off mute and give us your name and address, please.
Sure, absolutely. Kimberly 15 Converse Circle. And I'm speaking as a teacher at Mount. And I think I just wanted to say that, I was safe a lot this summer. We haven't even really been social distancing. We've been being as cautious as we can. And I feel that that's teaching her the right thing, but it has also instilled kind of a sense of fear in her, so that she is really nervous about going back and actually doesn't feel safe to go back. So I think that my concern is not just the physical safety of a lot of our children, but sort of their mental health as well, in being nervous about going back and how that looks. My other point was, just as a teacher, I feel, it's a little daunting to have to think about the hybrid model in focusing on planning for in-person teaching as well as remote. And I feel like our students really deserve teachers who can focus all of their time into one avenue rather than be unfocused. As somebody else mentioned earlier, the sooner we know what that focus is, the better prepared we'll be. So in my opinion, that's making the call to be remote and then giving us teachers as much time as possible to really prepare for that mode of teaching as best we can for the students. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly, for your comments. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further folks in the audience who'd like to make a comment? I don't see any. Nope. Okay. We'll close the opportunity for public comments, and we will move on to our next order of business, the presentation of East Long Meadow Public Schools reopening planning instructional models for the 2020-2021 school year.
Mr. Thompson, before moving to that, did you want to amend the agenda to take a look at the calendar, or do you want to do that after the presentation?
Well, I think I'd rather do this in case it has an effect on the calendar. I don't know what that would be, but I could foresee a potential for some effect on it. So
Okay.
we'll save that. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to bear with me while I share my screen. Let's see. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so to the points that many of our individuals who spoke in public comment, this planning has been incredibly challenging. I think our first speaker talked about no fantastic options, and I think many of our groups unfortunately are feeling that way, that we know as we have gone through, say, the past 9 weeks of planning, that what we're doing is not necessarily answering all the questions for families and the ELPS community. Unfortunately, in some cases, as we plan, we're probably creating more questions, and that's probably been the most frustrating piece to all of this, because usually we're looking to put models in place and plans in place that solve issues and support students and families. And we're attempting to do that here. But unfortunately, we know that no matter the plan ultimately we put in place, that there will be some who are feeling still anxious and unsupported. And we're going to continue to work right up until we begin school to try to alleviate and mitigate that as much as possible. And with that said, as we go through this. Everybody's had a chance to see this. I'll post this after this meeting. I'll send it out to staff and see if we can get it posted on the webpage. And we'll be adding to this throughout this week, adding things like some of our cleaning protocols, some of our protocols for how we would deal with information coming from the health department around COVID-19 and so forth. So this plan will get larger. Right now, it's roughly 27 pages. And what you have in it is sort of our overall look at what reopening entails, 2 instructional models. We also provide information on all the health and safety protocols. And then we go into a little bit more depth with the hybrid model itself, and then a full remote learning model. And at the end, we outline some of the professional development that has been going on this summer, and certainly some of the professional development that will continue as we begin the school year, at least for staff. As you know, the Commissioner of Education has worked with the 2 largest unions in Massachusetts, American Federation of Teachers and the Mass Teachers Association. And the one thing that they did agree on was to reduce for this year the 180-day requirement for students and reduce it to 170 days. So that does give us some time, needed time, to work with our staff and take a look at everything that we've been planning over the last 9 weeks or so. Bear with me, I don't want to make anybody dizzy, but I'm just scrolling into the plan. So we've been working basically since June 5th to put together plans. During that time, almost weekly, we've received new documents and guidance from DESE or the Mass Department of Public Health or some other agency who's looking to help provide guidance along those lines. The challenge, obviously, with all this planning is that as you continue to get more information, that may change plans that you thought you had completed the week prior. And so that's been something that's been going on all summer. We've had 4 running groups helping us with this, and I can't say enough about this group of individuals that populated these 4 groups, their time, their energy, their creativity. We're just incredibly grateful for all of their involvement. So the first one has been the leadership team, which obviously has central office administrators, you see, superintendent, assistant superintendent, director of student support services, director of curriculum, all of whom are on this meeting this evening, as well as all of our principals and assistant principals. So this is the group that has met almost weekly since late spring, early summer, to look at all the different plans that are coming from other groups who have been helping us. We have an operations planning group that's been meeting somewhat regularly that has pulled in not only our school physician, but also our nurse leader, director of food services, and representatives from our custodial unit, as well as a member of the ELEA, the East Long Meadow Education Association. And this is really targeted and looked at the guidance around how we're going to run health services, how we're going to run food services, and what differences and changes we need to make in terms of cleaning and disinfecting the building. And it also has started to look at the response protocols that we were provided from DESE and the medical community, you know, should we be alerted to a potential exposure. And this group has been incredibly helpful in helping us change some of the things we're going to do on a daily basis in our buildings in all of these different areas. Then we've had a group that is an instructional planning group that's taken a look at not only the family survey data. We have our second survey that went out last week, and breaking that down in terms of what families are saying their needs are and some of their concerns, but also just breaking down, as you'll see as we get going into the models, what does it mean to have a hybrid model where you're combining in-person learning some of the week, remote learning some of the week, as well as use of software and so forth as the week goes on. And so this group has been immensely helpful, and we have not only people we've mentioned before in the previous groups, but members of the East Long Meadow Education Association and members of the paraprofessional group as well. And so they've been looking at the guidelines and really helping us provide some type of model and outline that we can share with the public, as well as they then branched off into their individual buildings and started to help build what it would mean for each building schedule should the district go into a hybrid model or go into a full remote model. And then really since early April, we've been meeting with our with officers from the ELEA to take a look at any contractual issues and any unique situations. And with this pandemic, almost every situation has been unique. And so there's a lot of discussion that needs to go on. And certainly we have 5 collective bargaining groups in the East Long Meadow Public Schools, and changes in working conditions is something that needs to be bargained and discussed. And so we're really thankful that the ELEA has been working with us straight through since April. And I know that not only do we have ELEA members in the audience, I'm pretty sure we have the ELEA president, Eliel Gonzalez, in the audience as well, because they have been part of our discussions and planning all the way through, and we still have discussions to go as we move through August to make sure that we put hopefully the best possible program in place for our students and families.
Gordon, before we go further, are we going to stop? Like, are we running this as if we're taking questions as you go through your presentation, or waiting till the end, Greg or Gordon?
You certainly can stop me at any point and ask questions. I'm happy to answer. We're all happy because we have Dr. Welsh with us, we have Mrs. Brown with us, and we have Mrs. Blair with us. All of us could probably answer questions depending on which angle the question's coming from.
You have a question, Sarah?
I want to speak to those working groups. You know, I think part of what I was hoping for tonight's meeting that we were going to be able to gather was some direct insight from the individuals who comprise those groups.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say, for myself, I do think it's a little disappointing. While the superintendent and those groups were charged with making the plans, we are ultimately the body charged with deciding on which plan we're going with. And without some of those representatives there, or at our meeting rather, Department of Health, nursing, custodians, food service, our unions, I think it makes our decision-making process that much more challenging, because
Sure.
we can't directly ask, you know, what is the current situation with the infection rate in East Long Meadow from the director of health.
I do have that information.
But I also feel, Gordon, like it shouldn't necessarily be you being the face of that. I think we should be hearing that directly from the individuals whose profession it is to be able to speak to those types of situations. So that for me is just something that I think we need to consider as we move forward with these decisions, that they be present to kind of shed their insight and professional opinion and answer questions in the moment specific to particular points of both the plans. So I just think as a body moving forward, we need to consider that so that they're at our meetings.
Sure.
Gordon, I know you spoke with the director of health though, and today, right? And you do have that data in terms of the infection rate currently. Do you have that for East Long Meadow?
I do. So I did speak with Amy Petrosky, who is our director of health for East Long Meadow. Not only have we been working closely with our Board of Health, but most of our plans prior to even getting into summer planning, we had worked on with Amy, and she's been fantastic and incredibly helpful. But to that point, so as of July 29th, the total case count in East Long Meadow for COVID-19 was 278 cases. Over the last 14 days, there have only been 4 new cases, and they're looking at 14-day averages. Of the 4, 2 of the 4 were in the age group of 18 or younger. So right now, the percent positivity that they reported was 1.01%. one of the thresholds that I believe the governor and possibly the commissioner are looking at is that we stay well below 5% positivity. I believe Massachusetts is hovering somewhere around 2%.
2%.
Yeah, at the moment.
And do we have numbers as to what our rates we're looking at the peak in town? Like when COVID was at its highest point within East Long Meadow, what was our percent of infection at that moment in time?
So I don't have those numbers. I just have the total case count.
Just as a point of comparison as we move forward, because if our highest point, and I'm making this up, was 2.5%, and that's still well below the 5% that the governor's recommending. So I just think those are pieces of data, like actual data, that as we're making these decisions, we need to have, and that the general public needs to be aware of, so that when we are reviewing plans such as these, we have health data to consider, because those should be some of the decision points I believe that we should be considering as we're making a very, very weighty decision for not only the educational well-being of our students, but the health. And if families hear things like there's a 1% infection rate right now in our community, that could also influence how the survey data comes back.
Absolutely.
And Sarah, I will say there are a few members of those groups that are in the audience. So if there's some specific individual you'd like to talk to, we can see if we can pull them in tonight as well.
I don't want to put them on the spot because I don't know that they were planning on speaking, but I just think as we continue to move forward, that we should include those individuals as actual panelists, and they can speak to certain points of these plans, because to Gordon's point, these plans weren't just written by the superintendent and the leadership team. There was much more insight, as there should be, from multiple stakeholders. And I just think they should also have a voice at the table during these types of presentations.
Absolutely. It's an excellent point. Okay, so moving forward into the health and safety protocols. Many of you have seen these, and I know our parents have seen these because we've sent them out and posted them on the web page. Obviously, these can be revised as we gain more information or more insight, not only from our own planning group, but anything from the state, the department, as well as probably most importantly, Mass Department of Public Health. But some things that we need to understand is that school in person, whether you're an in-person model, whether you're in a hybrid model, or whether you are, well, I suppose if you're in a remote model, then we don't need to talk about masks. But anything that's going on in our building will involve a variety of strategies to make sure that we're doing everything possible to keep people safe. One of those strategies is that masks are mandatory for staff and students in grades 2 through 12. Obviously, if there's a given health situation that makes wearing a mask challenging, that might be one of the few situations where someone would not be wearing a mask. It's strongly recommended for even grades lower than grade 2 that they also wear masks, and anyone on a school bus is required to wear a mask. So we would encourage not only all students get into the habit as we prepare for school, wearing and learning how to appropriately take masks, put masks on and take them off. But if families could talk about that at home, because I think to someone's point earlier, this is something that is new for all of us. We know that there's a mask order in Massachusetts, and we know that it's had a lot of debate across the country. But this is something that is something we have to do to protect people's health. The other thing is something that actually we've done consistently in education, especially at the elementary level. We have sinks in all of our classrooms, and we've always practiced hand washing and making sure that we have good hand hygiene. This is going to become even more important as a strategy, obviously, to keep all of us healthy, is practicing proper hand hygiene. And where we don't have sinks immediately available in classrooms, all of our classrooms will have hand sanitizer. This is something that not only do we order at the beginning of June or actually late May, it's already in. So we're ready to outfit all our classrooms with hand sanitizer and make sure that throughout the day, this is something that we're encouraging. With the earliest guidance, which I believe in terms of PPE and preliminary guidance around returning to school in June and early June, they talked about distancing. And that's something people have heard a lot about throughout the spring and into the summer. And as we have set up and looked at our buildings, we are looking at making sure that desks are 6 feet apart, because we know that that's the goal, is keeping roughly 6 feet apart, but also with these other strategies to keep people healthy, masks and hand washing. So we've set up our classrooms at 6 feet apart, which certainly does eventually limit how many desks you can get into a given classroom. Hence, starting towards looking at the hybrid model. One thing that we do know is that obviously on any given day, people will be moving, and that there will be people who get into a closer range than 6 feet. That's why you're using all these strategies in conjunction with each other, that it's not just one strategy that is used to keep people healthy.
Gordon, can I ask another question? Sorry, while we're on the point of distancing.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned that at 6 feet apart, and there's a diagram on the next page that talks about, it looks like 15 students on average when there's 6 feet of physical distancing. Is that a typical class size in East Long Meadow, that 750 square feet?
So it's somewhat typical. This actually came from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education guidance. I figured I'd show you some of the guidance that they're giving us. So we're averaging somewhere between, say, 12 and 15 desks when you go 6 feet apart. And so that's where obviously you're going to need to reduce the amount of people in any one of our buildings on a given day. But yeah, if this was one of our classrooms, it would be something that's why I use the diagram, because it's pretty representative of what our classrooms would look like.
And we have, so I guess my question is, because we are looking at only 2 plans this evening, and the fully coming back completely in person was not one of the plans that we're reviewing. So I'm just trying to understand then, if this is a typical potentially class size, 750 square feet, and it fits roughly 15 students with the 6 feet of physical distance, how far off are we in terms of being able to bring kids back? Just knowing that our average class size is not much beyond 15.
So we, in trying to get, originally with the early guidance, sort of looking at the 3 feet minimum and the 6 feet, we were able to get roughly 20 desks per classroom. But the big challenge there is, as soon as you go to any kind of situation where masks come off, the guidance tells you to go back to 6 feet. So we would not be able to maintain a classroom where you're having mask breaks, or in the, say, in the elementary classrooms, we may be eating in classrooms as well. And you cannot, none of the guidance allows for less than 6 feet when eating. And so rather than continue to play around with, are we at a minimum of 3, we went to the full 6 and looked at how we can do this in the best way possible to ensure people's safety.
No, I understand that point. I guess I was wondering, how far off were we? So if 6 feet in this classroom diagram that we have fit 15 students, how many of our rooms could we actually have done this in?
So Sarah, I could speak to that. Today I was in Mountain View with Mrs. Santinella to take a look actually what the space felt like. They actually set up all the desks 3 feet apart with plans that each student would have a desk, and each would be in half the time. So every other desk would be occupied. That just fit within the 3 feet, meaning only half the class would fit within the 6 feet, and it was right to the number. Each tile is a foot on the floor.
Mhm.
You can see where the teacher standing in the front of the room would be exactly 6 feet from the first row of students, whom are exactly 6 feet from each other, and then the following row behind them, leaving room for 12 students. Really, not very much more than that would
Right.
fit in that 6 foot criteria. Same at Maple Shade. I happened to look in the windows. I didn't get in the building, but I did look in the windows. They have just a single desk set up. They don't have one for each student. They just don't have enough desks. But the same thing. There's no way to meet the 6 feet criteria we could get them all in.
Yeah,
It's just-
15 is the best case scenario. It was usually more like 10.
Right.
And that's including the closure of common spaces and setting those up as classrooms.
Yep.
Looking at libraries, looking at cafeterias, gymnasiums, like the gymnasium over at Meadowbrook, that can be
Well,
divided. The
Yeah,
stage.
we're going to be utilizing those spaces as well, but we're going to be utilizing those spaces for classes that may have to break out. Say if you have a pull-out group, or you have a special that you're running. But in, say, Meadowbrook, only Mountain View and Maple Shade, to the point of classes 20 and below, really have class sizes that hover around there. Meadowbrook's above class size in most grades of 20, 21, 22. And so we were not going to be able to get full in-person in all our classrooms in a full in-person model if the entire enrollment came back.
Again, and just similar to the point from before, I think if we're the body charged with making the decision and one of the options that the state asked to be considered was taken off the table, I think, again, part of this presentation should have included, these are the reasons why we
Right.
took this plan off of the table. Because again, for myself, for other members of the committee, for the individuals watching at home who have children, they might be wondering why was that taken completely off the table if they're following the news, if they're, on social media, because that's what was said, that 3 plans should be presented by each school district and that then the
Right.
school committee should be making the final decision. So for one to be removed and not have some explanation within this, I also think we need to alert the folks who are watching and who will watch this after the fact that there was a third option, and this is why it was not brought forward to the school committee, rather than kind of just saying these are the guidelines and not addressing it.
Right, and so certainly that's what we're talking about here, and it's an excellent point. When our principals went to measure this out, they knew that that's what they were reporting. They could not get their entire enrollment into their building with the staff we have and put all these safety protocols in place.
So if I might jump in again, I'm thinking about Mountain View particularly. The cafeteria could fit 40 kids. So if we're trying to get everybody in and we only get about 10 kids in a class, that leaves about 100 extra kids that we don't have a place for them.
And again, Heather, I'm just clarifying, that's assuming that everyone chose to come back.
Correct.
Correct.
Right now, we have about 18% of the families who have answered the survey saying that they do not want to attend the hybrid option, because we sent out the hybrid versus the remote. I mean, the other thing here I think is important for folks to know, and I know you know this, is that, even if we brought all of the kids back, it's not school as we know it. And so a lot of the families on the survey were really concerned about the fact that kids can't really interact the way they were, they're used to, and they're concerned about their children wearing masks all day long, and all the kinds of things that we do with good teaching is really challenging to do when they're all in the room together and they can't really collaborate.
But I think to that point, Heather, none of these are school as we know it.
No,
So,
you're very right.
I think that's like, none of these are going to present as a typical school year. So again, just to make the point that, again, if we're supposed to see 3 options and we're supposed to be making our decisions based on that, for myself personally, I won't speak for other members of the committee, it would have, I think for myself and maybe other members who are watching, individual stakeholders who are watching online, or like I said, we'll view this after, being able to walk through that, to have those numbers, to be able to discuss this is why, as a district, we did not bring forward a fully in-person model, would have informed the decision-making process as a whole.
I guess I understand where you're coming from that, but I guess in the back of my mind, I kind of knew, just based on, I just knew we were never going to be able to go back fully. I think that would have been extremely difficult based on the younger grades and the size of what Meadowbrook is right now. I mean, try as we might, there's just no way that we can get those children fed and in the classroom and spread out. And so I do understand what you're saying. It would have been nice to have had, like, these are the reasons why we couldn't do these options and be available to us beforehand. But I do understand. I wasn't upset when I didn't see that third option, I guess, because I felt it was just, as much as I want to see it happen, Sarah, it's just not that. I guess I just felt like there's just no way it could have happened. But I do respect what you're saying there.
I agree with that, and I felt the same way, that we were never going to get everybody back in, right away. That's a goal down the road. So I never really considered a full-blown bring everybody back model. And I too appreciate what you're saying, Sarah, and the points that you're making. But my concentration always has been on the hybrid or just the remote, not full in person.
Maybe
We'll just clarify, I'm not talking about everyone. I'm talking about folks who want to come back. So we're already almost at 20% of our student population saying they weren't coming back. So just taking that into consideration when we're thinking about where kids are.
And we might even also, as we go through this and we're listening, and I'm writing down questions as we go and thoughts and things, we may find that there might be something that we come across that we feel, well, could we do this or whatever as we go to. And I don't know, we'll see, just there's a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts as we go through this. There really is.
Oh, there definitely is. I agree with that.
Oh, I do have one, because you did mention remote. What is the cost for the remote program? Like, how would that impact if it's 20% of our students went remote with the program that doesn't, and has, from what I hear, it's 100% remote. It doesn't deal with any of our teachers or staff.
So we're going to talk about that later on, but just to
okay, then we'll do that later. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah. Why don't you keep going, Gordon, and then maybe some of these questions might be addressed.
Yep.
Okay. So as we continue through this, cohorts, obviously you've heard that word a number of times, and we're looking, obviously, in all of our plans to keep students with a set cohort as much as possible. That's easier to do at the elementary level, where there's a homeroom classroom, and have specials move through those classes. At the secondary level, say at Birchland Park, you can do somewhat of that with the teaming structure. And then at the high school, they're going to be moving back to a straight block schedule to minimize the amount of passing time or opportunities students have. Bus transportation has obviously been a big discussion item this summer, and we had spoken just under masks that all students, all individuals on buses will need to wear masks, and that the most recent guidance has, and I have a diagram here, basically a seating arrangement where you're placing one student per bus seat or bench in sort of a diagonal pattern. And so it gives you an idea of what that looks like. And then the rest of the guidance talks about not only masks, but also keeping windows open to the extent possible and keeping the air flowing through. Cleaning and disinfecting, we talked a little bit about earlier when we were talking about the operations group. One of the things that we're working with our custodians on as we look to open schools is we've always done cleaning and disinfecting, say, after hours. Now we're going to be doing that plus. So we'll be changing our schedule so that more of our custodians will be on during the actual operational day, so that highly touched surfaces can be cleaned and disinfected throughout the day, such as, just an example, after school gets in and we lock doors, in addition to just locking the doors, now we'll be disinfecting all door handles for those main entrances and so forth. but we're also coordinating how our custodians work. They've always worked in conjunction with, say, food services, but to Ms. Trulio's point earlier, we'll be utilizing spaces such as cafeterias and so forth during the early portion of the day before lunches begin. So now we're going to have to work in concert with food services to prep those areas for the start of the day and then prep them again and disinfect again before we utilize them for lunch. Actually, right now it looks like high school and Birchland and possibly Maple Shade will be utilizing their cafeterias for lunch. But right now, Meadowbrook and Mountain View look like they probably will be eating in their classrooms. And we're going to continue to iron out those plans as we go forward.
Gordon, in regards to the bus, I know one of the pieces of information that came out from DESE had mentioned that districts, and correct me if I'm wrong about this information, would be required to provide masks for the buses in the event that a child arrives at the bus stop without a mask. Was that part of our PPE purchase that was already taken place?
Yes, so we've purchased, so it's actually twofold in answering. So the LPVC provides, Lower Pioneer Valley Educational Collaborative provides our transportation. And so we've been meeting regularly with them, as well as the 7 districts that make up the Lower Pioneer Valley Educational Collaborative. And we've discussed that. So drivers will have extra masks on board, the disposable masks, ones that look like this, the blue, that they'll have those on board for students who may have forgotten their mask or dropped their mask in a puddle or whatever it may be, because we can't allow people on the bus without a mask. Additionally, to answer your question, we have also, for our schools, purchased, I think to date, about 18,000 of those masks, and those are in. And although we know that families will probably already have masks, and we really encourage them to have them at the ready and talk about wearing those, we know that similar to forgetting a book or forgetting their lunch, students will arrive and have forgotten their masks. So we'll be prepared for that as well. But that's something that we hope families will help us with.
And then in terms of this, and again, correct me if I'm misinterpreting the DESE guidance, but my understanding was when I looked through the transportation guidance that then there was also some procedures that were being placed upon either bus monitors or bus drivers in regards to children potentially presenting with symptoms, and they're either refusal to allow them to get on the bus or their caution about allowing children who they perceive. Is there training that's being provided to bus monitors and to bus drivers in regards to understanding what those symptoms are? And if they do refuse, where does the child go? I guess those are questions like that I have.
Right, so that's a great actually segue, because if you look on the screen, we're getting into that area. One of the biggest things that we have to all take responsibility for is understanding the symptoms and how they work and what we should be looking for. So on a daily basis, we should be taking this inventory of ourselves before reporting to work. And certainly we will review this with staff and make sure that this is posted around our buildings. And so the symptoms we are looking for is a fever, roughly 100.4 Fahrenheit, a cough that's not necessarily known due to other causes such as allergies sometimes produce coughs, difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, new situation where people all of a sudden lose the sense of taste and smell, sore throat, headache in combination with some of these other symptoms, muscle aches, body aches, nausea, vomiting, fatigue when in combination with these other symptoms, and nasal congestion, again, with this idea that it's not immediately designated to some other cause, such as seasonal allergies. So these are things that not only will we need to review with all staff, and certainly the LPVC will be reviewing with bus drivers. But the first and foremost line of defense is doing this at home, because it will be, a list like that is challenging to pick up, whether, you know, our drivers and our monitors have training or not, when they are at a bus stop picking up children who are getting on that bus. You know, our first line is always safety and making sure that they're entering and getting on the bus safely, getting seated properly. Within that minute or so that the bus is picking up at a given bus stop, it'd be challenging to go through all this and check this for each student. So this is something that we have to consistently communicate out, not only to our staff, but to our families, and make sure that they're doing this inventory, you know, each evening and each morning before sending people off to school.
And then is taking their temperatures before they enter the school?
So this is something that, it's a great question. This got some wide debate early on in the summer, and ultimately the guidance coming down from the medical community that was advising the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is that's not going to be something that is incredibly helpful for schools, because what they're finding is there are a number of false positives and there are a number of false negatives. So delaying the arrival into school by having some type of overhead temperature taking device did not seem like a prudent way to go. The other point that came from Dr. Clark, who is on our operations committee and is our consulting physician, and actually Dr. Clark's worked with us for the last few years as our consulting physician. She said students, student age individuals don't necessarily run the fever. So it's not all these symptoms are going to show up in any one person who may have contracted COVID-19.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just so just to go back to the last part of my question was, if a bus driver or a bus monitor does say see 2 or 3 of these symptoms, or doesn't know that a child has allergies and they are asking the child not to get on the bus and there is no family member present, if it is a bus stop, what happens then? Like, do we have a protocol in place? Is the bus driver calling the school?
Yeah, basically what would happen there is the bus would not only notify their dispatch, but then notify the school, and we would look to notify the parents. And obviously we're not going to leave the child, but we're not going to, in that situation, impact others who may be on the bus. And so we would work to make sure that an adult is brought into that situation very quickly so that we can keep all children safe. The unfortunate thing is none of these situations necessarily are going to go quickly. And so you're going to have delays in doing all this. But the safety is the main criteria for everything that we're doing. And so we'd rather take the time to do that than to ever leave a child to their own devices at a bus stop, or obviously impact others on the bus who, if there is a situation where people have the possibility of risking exposure to COVID-19.
Thank you. And again, this is more also in fairness to folks who are watching, so that they know that if somebody has presumed symptoms or something to that effect, that they know that child isn't entering the bus, that the bus might wait, notify that family, and then obviously, like you just alluded to, there would be an impact on the potential next stop and the stop after that in terms of a delay, in terms of children getting picked up. So I just think these are the types of pieces of information that are helpful for families to know about and to be considering when they're thinking about, transportation come fall.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad you're asking the questions. I think it's important. That's what this presentation is about. So now we're moving into the learning models. And as we discussed earlier, as our principals had gone through with their custodians in measuring rooms, we didn't ultimately have the square footage and the staff to put all the safety protocols in place that would be needed to bring back our full enrollment. So what we have outlined here is the hybrid learning model. And basically what that means is that it's a combination of in-person learning and remote learning. And what we're looking to do is create 2 cohorts divided alphabetically. We're right now working on balancing these, but it could be something similar to A through LET seems to be somewhat the midpoint for the district. What we have to do now is break that down further at each building level. But one of the things that has certainly been a concern, and rightfully so for our families, is we don't want to have a situation where one sibling's on cohort A and another sibling is on cohort B. So we're looking to make sure that we put plans in place so that families are on the same schedule. And so what this looks like is it's a 2-day in-person hybrid model where cohort A goes to school and is following somewhat their typical school schedule on Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, for the most part, our students and staff would be working remotely. And again, and we'll go into more detail as we go further into this model, they would be receiving instruction remotely and following somewhat of a modified school day in a remote setting, different than what students experienced last spring. And we'll go into more detail as we move down the chart. Then at cohort A on Thursday and Friday, they would be sort of on their off cohort day, if you will. And on these days, we'd be relying somewhat on our personalized learning tools, which we'll go into more detail further down in the plan. They would have live instruction throughout their off cohort days. Some of this will be coming from specials teachers who may be delivering their content area remotely for all students. They also will have opportunity for small group support and instruction. And as I scroll down, one of the things that we will be delivering through our counselors and school psychologists and possibly other designated staff members is our social and emotional education and support. This is something that most of our buildings, actually all of our buildings, do regularly in person in a typical school year. And we certainly are going to do on these off cohort days where students might be feeling more isolated because they are at home, they're not at school in person. And so we feel that could be a great benefit to deliver these lessons here. The other things that students will be working on is, we talked earlier a little bit about classroom management platforms, things like Google Classroom and Bloom's. And so our teachers will be posting information and assignments that students will be utilizing on these days. And generally they'll be setting themselves up for their next in-person learning day.
Now, I had a question about, so when the students are in the classroom, where, I mean, you have pairs, where are you planning on utilizing those more in a hybrid model? More of them part of the in-class at the lower levels, the in-class hybrid part, or more having them touch base with the students on that Thursday, Friday, answer questions, keep them on track? So how are you planning to utilize the paras?
So to that point that you actually just made, Mrs. Margin Boucher, the paras, given that our class sizes will be smaller, may be able to be utilized in a variety of ways. And so they will be offering small group support on these off cohort days. They also may be used in classrooms as well, or for some pullout groups for the in-person, but we'll be using them in a variety of ways. And actually, we saw some of this at our elementary schools in the late spring. There were paras who worked with students one-on-one and started to engage in that way, which was incredibly beneficial. And so certainly we want to learn from the success that we had in the spring, and going forward, make our plan more robust.
Okay, because I just feel that, especially, you know, on those days, like on the Wednesdays or whatever days are off, it just sometimes it's too much for the kids to focus on their own. So I just want to make sure that we are utilizing our paras the way that they're meant to be, and maybe in a little bit of a different way too. So thank you.
Right. Sure.
Gordon, can you,
Go ahead, Sarah.
are you sure? Can you clarify, so then on Wednesday, that would mean every student in East Long Meadow Public Schools would be learning remotely, regardless of cohort?
So actually most students, and that's where I was going as I scrolled down, and I think Dr. Welsh is about to.
So before we talk about that part, so then how are we envisioning that Wednesday being utilized to the benefit of both cohorts? Because you're going to have a situation now where some kids will have had the in-person instruction, children will be coming up upon that in-person instruction. If they're joining together, and this is me making that assumption, they might not be rejoining into one Zoom call on that Wednesday, but if they were coming together on that Zoom call on a Wednesday, in terms of pacing, are we ensuring that when they are remote, that they are continuing with pacing in such a fashion that they are in lockstep with the children who are in person on Thursday and Friday, so that then on those remote days, everyone can be on pace in terms of instruction?
I know at Birchland they're talking about using that Wednesday as either a Monday or a Friday. Does that make sense?
No, sorry.
Like kicking off the learning for the week or wrapping up the learning for the week.
So to the extent possible, your question, what our buildings are going to be looking to do is do just that, try to bring that Wednesday to bring things together for their students, and hopefully keep them somewhat aligned as they go through. But obviously, as we begin the year, that might be a little challenging until they get into somewhat of a rhythm. But they're going to have to use that Wednesday as a way to the point Mrs. Brown, I think, was making, either kick off some new material for the entire class, or pull material together so that they are keeping them somewhat coordinated.
And Sarah, I think the way, if you look at how the calendar lines up, actually cohort 2 will start out first on their Thursday, Friday. Cohort 1 will be next Monday, Tuesday. So in theory, they should be on the same pace on Wednesday.
So long as what they do when they are home on Thursday or Friday or Monday and Tuesday is aligned with what kids are doing when they are in school. Because if that's not done in unison, then you're not going to be back together come that Wednesday again. So the pacing it would need to be uniform Monday through Friday, regardless of the setting or the delivery of the instruction. So if my child is home on Thursday, they need to be receiving the same lesson, the same instruction as a child who is sitting in a desk. Because if not, then they're never going to but they're never going to sync back up. They're never, so then those Wednesdays are going to have to become differentiated. Those Wednesdays are going to have to be separated. I don't know how then you can have everybody back together on a Wednesday if the instructional opportunities have not been uniform across the rest of the week.
I guess I was kind of understanding it, like say our first day of school is going to be a Wednesday, say, and everyone's going to come together. It's going to be remote. And so that the cohort A kids, all right, might miss out on that first, like they'll get their core stuff on that Wednesday, and then they'll have their work that they do, but then the cohort B is going to get their one-on-one instruction. And then it might take a week, and then cohort A will get their one-on-one instruction on Monday, and then they all come and wrap it up. But I think it will end up flowing the way it works, because what's going to happen is some of the kids are going to be learning it B, and then they're going to be working on that work, and then they'll all end up getting together. But you're going to have to, the first week they're going to have to figure out how to get it so that by the following Wednesday, everyone's on the same page. But I thought it through in my head, and it does make sense.
Heather, can you address pacing a little bit, Heather?
Sure. I mean, what it sounds like is, Well, I think what you're saying, Mrs. Trujillo, is that if, the kids that are learning in the classroom should be learning exactly what the kids at home. So the teacher would be teaching the in class as at the same time or simultaneously with the at home kids. But we're trying to work around that with the small group instruction on the off days, and utilizing Wednesday as well, like you said, for differentiation in small groups. So while there'll be full class learning, there will also be a lot of opportunities for like small group instruction for kids based on what they're needing. Part of the plan on Wednesdays is to have collaborative planning and MTSS time to really look at the data that's coming through with teacher assessments or other assessments and really figure out, who needs what and how do we provide that in those small groups on those in at home days.
Yeah, I just know that pacing is very delicate, regardless of whether or not we're entering into one of these models. The state standards are aggressive at best in terms of a 180-day model. I think most of us on this committee and on this call can agree to that. There are a large number of standards. DESE has not yet released any guidance that has said we're reducing the number of standards or the expectations by grade level. So when we go into a model, and as we discuss a model such as this one, and we're not, what I'm hearing right now, and if I'm understanding this wrong, please correct me, that's the point of the conversation, is on Monday and Tuesday, that's really when students are going to get a bulk of their instruction, or on Thursday and Friday when they're actually with their teacher. And once that kind of stops, that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is really left to more small group instruction, individual or personalized learning tools, platform-based instruction, and then a touch point on Wednesday with their classroom teacher. So my concern is, how do we continue to address the standards at the pace and the rate that we need to, while at the same time ensure that we're effectively teaching students? Because I'm not sure that I'm seeing that right now.
Has there been any guidance, Gordon or Heather, on the standards in terms of requirements for this specific year?
No.
No, they haven't reduced them.
What they did, Scott, sorry, go ahead, Heather.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the end of last year, what they did was they provided, if you will, sort of the priority standards in accordance with DESE, but they have not done that this year, even with the reduction of the 180 to 170. I don't know if that's something that might be forthcoming down the road, but they have not done that yet. So
nor have they said that MCAS is off the table. So we still have that end goal that we have to be planning for.
Right. And that's something that actually all our buildings are talking about and figuring out how we coordinate this. But I think the point, at one point that you had made is, yes, we're going to have to rely on those personalized learning tools to help with this, to keep that pace and coordination. Actually, I believe the first day, according to the calendar, actually falls on a Wednesday.
It does.
So everybody's in remote learning that day.
I also think that maybe, I don't know if it can happen at the younger levels, but I think at the older levels, you might find a teacher pulls those at-home kids in for a Google Classroom and includes all the kids in that Google Classroom meeting too. I mean, they might decide, all right, we really need to have everybody together, and maybe they might find it might in November, hey, I think that's how I want to do it. And, or they may not want to, but I think that as it evolves, I think the teachers are going to find I think they're going to find out what works best. And as far as having to meet goals this year, that's a good one, Sarah. It's going to be tough.
Well, I just think we need to be planning for it. And I'm not saying that this doesn't. It concerns me that when we have things written that speak to the fact of working independently on teacher posted assignments on a day that they should be continuing with new learning, that sounds to me like a continuation of old learning. And I don't know how we will pace out an academic year and already 170 days if on the days when students are not in front of a teacher, they are charged with working independently on assignments. They have to have instruction in order to be able to move forward with content.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's something obviously that we're continuing to discuss and try to coordinate so that we can keep both groups on track.
So, but does that lend the question in terms of remote learning versus the hybrid model? Does remote actually lend better to pacing and meeting standards and uniformity of instruction than the hybrid model might? Just a question.
Well, I mean, well, a full remote, while it, you know, has its own challenges, obviously you have a more uniform schedule because everyone is remote. So your teaching is being delivered in a more coordinated way as opposed to in a hybrid where you have a group in front of the teacher and then you have a group who is on those off cohort days.
Right.
And do we have the capacity in terms of bandwidth or technology to, I think I saw it come up in the chat too, and it was a question of mine as well, to live stream instruction? Can we actually have a teacher continuing to teach on Thursday and Friday and be able to have that broadcast to students who are at home and recorded for families who can't have their child on during that time?
I think we have the bandwidth and the capacity to do that. That's not something that we've discussed in our planning with our teaching staff yet, but that's certainly something that we can continue to discuss as we go forward.
Gordon, why don't we just go through the rest of the presentation? I feel like we're kind of getting a little slowed down here. So if we go through the rest of the presentation on both options and then maybe have our questions at the end, just
Sure.
in terms of trying to get through this.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the questions was, on Wednesdays, would all students be learning from home? And I think Dr. Welsh was getting ready to make a comment, but at the bottom of the chart here, something that DESE has defined in a number of documents and guidance and conference calls, they are looking for districts to identify and hopefully ensure that certain high priority students are in person and receiving instruction and services 5 days a week. And I can certainly let Dr. Welsh comment further on that because she's been working incredibly diligently because this information has been changing also on a week-to-week basis.
It has. So very quickly, on July 9th, we received guidance from the Associate Commissioner, who's also the State Director for Special Education, encouraging students to consider the needs of students that have significant and complex needs. They provided districts with specific criteria and asked us to identify students who in fact have not been successful engaging with remote learning, generally as a result of their own disability and the fact that some types of instruction, certainly certain types of therapies and related services, are best delivered in person. And so they instructed districts to develop a plan for meeting those students' needs as directly and as in person as possible. And so we have done that by matching their criteria to our students who have IEPs. Those criteria are fairly stringent in terms of identifying that group. We have reached out to their families and have notified them that their students would certainly fall within this category. I've been meeting with staff and we've been talking about the best way to meet those students' needs, either through this 5-day model, or if a family did not feel comfortable sending their child with complex needs into school at this very challenging time, that we would meet their needs in other ways. So we've looked at and we've started to identify a system for providing those services, as one example, perhaps by appointment, where families would interact with our staff and develop a time where the student could come in and receive a related service or therapy. Those students will be provided transportation, and we are in the process of being prepared to meet the needs of the students whose families opt in and would like to have them in the buildings with us 5 days a week. The caveat to that would be our students in preschool. Our preschool program is 4 days a week, and so those students would come 4 days a week. And we're in the process now of vetting out which students will actually be with us. We're reaching out to the families individually, and from that, we will be able to develop a schedule of special education, specifically designed instruction and related services for students in all 5 schools.
Joanne,
Dr.
how
Welch,
is,
would you propose, if we did go to a totally remote program, still having the high priority students come in for those 4 or 5 days?
That is the information that I have been, that I have gotten from DESE. I have the guidance right in front of me right now. And the statement reads, even if schools or districts are operating in a hybrid or remote model, educators and administrators must make every effort to continue to provide up to full-time in-person instruction to those students.
Any idea roughly how many students district-wide that might affect?
Overall, it's you know, Greg, I don't want to I would say between 30 and 40 students district-wide, and we're just starting to get feedback from families now individually about what they feel would be the best option for their child or for their family.
Okay, and what are the specifically services like speech and language pathologists? Would they meet remotely still, or?
So that's a very small group of students. Our other students with IEPs or our students who just receive related services through IEPs would fall into one of the cohort models and would be getting services, you know, preferably in person as much as possible, but also remotely during the off cohort days. I've looked at some of the proposed schedules that the principals have already begun to put together, and in every school, there's already time allocated for those services to be provided, where students wouldn't be missing other things in order to get those services directly.
so I was going to ask about that. Like, so if we did go from, and I know we're talking about the in-person model now, I know a lot of times it is hard to get those services in for the kids because you don't want them missing their specials, and I know there's kind of, it's part of the law too, but are those kinds of things going to have wiggle room this year to help you guys be able to function and get those kids the services they need? You know, you can't miss a PE or an art or a music, and I understand those are all important things, but.
Well, I've looked at some of the proposed schedules from the principals, and what they have already incorporated on some of the, what I would call the non-cohort days, are blocks of time that are almost like intervention blocks. So the students wouldn't be missing because those would be inclusive opportunities, right. And the students would not be missing that. I was very pleased to see that in the model that the principals put together, and it seems to be consistent throughout the district. Mrs. Boucher, you mentioned paraprofessionals. Right. So I have lots of plans for the paraprofessionals in terms of making sure that we're able not only to accommodate this high priority group, but also the remaining students who are going to need the individualized instruction and related services as well. So I think our paras are going to be pretty busy. They've done a nice job throughout the closure of promoting the social and emotional piece for students. They've run chat rooms, and they've provided even just some family support and things like that. Okay. So they've really done a very nice job in terms of just being part of the whole kind of instructional, profile as far as meeting the needs of our kids. And in order to be able to safely provide services to this particular group of students with complex and significant needs, the social distancing piece is going to be really, really important. And so I think it was Ms. Trulio who asked the question about other spaces in the building. And again, I've got my eye on those too. So, you know, we're going to be making sure that those services are provided as directly as possible.
Dr. Welsh, do you foresee the need for more staff to meet the needs of the student population?
Well, time will tell, because that seems to be vacillating. And even families that maybe were all in last week are not all in this week. But what we've been able to do, if it were necessary, I've already reached out to some of the professionals in the community. For lack of a better word, I'd call them vendors. So if our staff was unable to meet the full needs of a challenging student, we might be able to do that through contracted services.
So one of the things, Mr. Thompson, that we've been looking at is if we have to increase contracted services, that's something that we're looking at as part of our CARES Act grants and so forth, so that we can handle that.
So you know, all I would say is that just like everyone else, we're very eager to hear who will be joining us and who might not be, but I think that there are numerous ways to be flexible to provide as many direct services as possible to our students with challenging needs, but even, you know, with some of our students who have fairly significant IEPs as well.
Okay. Thank you. And clearly I've broken my rule of asking no questions, so I just open that back up to the committee.
Well, I'm glad you broke it with me.
Thank you, Dr. Welsh.
Other questions?
Are you going to address that next box?
Yeah.
Perfect, because I may have some questions there.
Okay. So obviously parents have been asking, and we knew that we needed to provide a platform if we're offering a hybrid model, but people don't feel comfortable in that. What would they be utilizing if they decide to opt out and stay fully remote? So given that our staff would be engaged in working the hybrid model, we at the high school will be utilizing Edgenuity, which offers a self-paced, robust curriculum that not only will help for opting out families should the school committee decide to open with a hybrid model, but also can help us with just some of the things we're doing from a curriculum standpoint throughout our regular in-person teaching. For the other schools, what we're waiting on is DESE's supposed to be vetting upwards of 4 vendors that they would then provide districts the opportunity to have a decreased licensure rate. And they have not identified those yet, although rumor has it that Edgenuity might be one of the companies that DESE's vetting. And so we're already in one agreement with Edgenuity, and possibly if they identify it tomorrow, we might be working with Edgenuity for other buildings as well.
And just to address the question that Mrs. Marjan Boucher asked earlier about Edgenuity, they do have a platform where they have their own quote unquote teachers / tutors behind the scenes. All we're getting from them is their curriculum. So it will still need to be facilitated by our teachers. So it won't be like we're purchasing educators. We'll just use their curriculum. And the high school, still with this one-to-one being relatively new, doesn't have access to a lot of online curriculum. They have Albert.io, which has a robust database of assessments around lots of different content, but not necessarily an online curriculum like, for example, the middle school has for 3 out of 4 of their core subjects.
All right. Now, what if a parent opts out and then they want to come back in? They decide things are looking better we decide to do the hybrid, they want to stay home, and then let's say November rolls around and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want my kid back in school. How are we going to work that?
So that's a great question. And parents and families certainly have the right to opt out initially as everyone is figuring all of this out, and then decide they would like to opt back in. We would like to provide a little bit of transition time to bring them back in. So we're looking at what that time frame should be. There's been no definite guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on this. It makes sense that maybe that should be around like the midpoint of a grading term or the end of a grading term to bring that student back in. And so we're working with our instructional planning group to try to define that better.
Okay, thank you.
This is one of the sections that I'm a little bit concerned about in terms of the quality of education that those that opt out of the hybrid model will receive.
Yes.
And I think that may be a big number of students. So I don't know how we address that. I know we have a limited amount of staffing or staff members and such, but I'm a little bit concerned about this portion of it.
I would agree with that, Greg. I think that's one of the questions I had. So I don't want to assume things. So can we clarify what monitoring means? Is that not that if this child opts out, that they are not going to get access to an ELPS educator, like an educator, for any portion of their time for direct instruction?
So they would have access certainly to an educator. They wouldn't necessarily have access to, say, if we're talking the high school, to a group of, say, 5 to 7 educators. It would probably be one person overseeing the group. And the way this has been set up is that it's a self-paced learning environment that is somewhat asynchronous. And so in this case, where we're not creating the fully remote model, that would be the platform that we would need to lean on.
But you can curate material in Edgenuity. Edgenuity can be reformatted to fit a particular scope and sequence of a particular district. That's one of the benefits of going with a program like Edgenuity. So why couldn't that be reformatted so that it followed the progression of standards across any of the courses that it has, so that it was in sync with the high school's pacing, and so that students could go to the class on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. So that's where I think I'm getting confused. If there's going to be virtual instruction occurring in some capacity, why then can't the students who are opting out be synced back up to that? Because it's going to be occurring Monday through Friday. So why do they have to feel almost like another cohort? I don't understand that in terms of this box. I feel like that's putting families in a very difficult position to choose the option to opt out, because they're then saying their child does not get access to an East Long Meadow Public School educator.
Right. And so certainly that they do have access, as I said, to an educator and to their counselors. If we can synchronize it, such as you just said, this will be our first venture into Edgenuity. And so maybe that's something that we can certainly do. We have to go through setting it all up and doing the professional development to make that happen.
And can we afford it? Edgenuity is very expensive. It is one of the most expensive programs out there. If we have families opting out, do we have a budget right now that can afford it? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's upwards of $200 a license.
If you get a site license, which is what we did at the high school, it's considerably less expensive, especially if you're using your own teachers and not their teachers. When you start paying per kid, it does get very expensive.
And that might be where, as DESE identifies what vendors they've been working with, it could be that situation that you just said, Mr. Trulio, in terms of the licenses. So we would need to look at that as well.
And are we only looking at that for the high school? We're not looking at it for the middle school, because my understanding is it goes down into 6th through 8th grade.
Right now, it could be Edgenuity again. We had already entered into an agreement prior to really entering the summer with Edgenuity. We had plans in motion to move this for the high school. And then as we got into the planning and getting guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, they were talking about vetting these vendors with a learning management system. And so that was something that we were hoping was going to happen we were hoping it was going to happen sooner than it has now, with that for the other grade levels. But hopefully we will get that tomorrow or the next day and start to move forward, or we can negotiate further with Edgenuity.
I'm just concerned about the built-in apparent inequities that could possibly occur with something like this, with using this in a hybrid model with people that, students that opt out, families that opt out. I'm just really concerned about, I agree with what Sarah's saying about the inequities, and I just got some real concerns about it. That's all.
I agree.
It's just the information coming out of DESE. They love to do this stuff on Friday afternoons when everybody has shut it down so they don't get any pushback or any criticism. And then they throw it at us, and we're all of a sudden in a position where we have to make a decision when we don't have all the information.
I mean, another concern with the Edgenuity is the students are losing their connection to our teacher.
Right.
I mean, in that social emotional aspect, they're really on this computer program all day. There's no interaction. So
They're not even seeing other students.
No.
That,
They're not.
yeah. But I also understand why you're thinking of doing it, because to have like, this is happening here and this is happening here, and then you've got these other, I understand the thought process behind that, but that is,
But I think that's the point, is I don't think it has to be this is happening here and this is happening there. I think there can be a way to bridge this so that the students who are opting out can become a part of the existing cohorts, rather than making them feel like an additional cohort, especially when you look at some of the programs that we're talking about in terms of the options. When you look at the chart, like ST Math as being the core math program that a student would be leaning on for both K through 5. And I'm a fan of ST Math, but I would not be comfortable with my child only having ST Math as their form of instruction for an academic year. I'm a fan of Lexia. I think it does wonderful things, but I would not be in favor of my child having that as their core instructional program for an entire academic year. And that shouldn't be what makes my decision versus them coming back into a hybrid model.
So we weren't looking to use ST Math and Lexia and so forth. That was going to be part of the hybrid and certainly part of the in-person. We were looking for these learning management systems.
And what's the chart below then, Gordon? I'm sorry, that's the only other chart I see that comes after that, because in this box it references the chart below.
Yeah, no, it's, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No.
Dizzy.
Provided in the chart below. Personalized learning tools provided in the chart below. I didn't see another chart, so forgive me if I misspoke.
Yeah, no, you're right. So that does talk about the learning tools, but we actually made a decision last week, so that's a revision that should have been stricken, that we would go with Edgenuity and what DESE comes up with as the learning management tool. And certainly if Edgenuity allows us to synchronize it more, then that's even better for our opt-out students. But as of getting this out into the packets, right at that point, we knew we had Edgenuity, and we were waiting on DESE for the other possible learning platforms to be vetted.
All right, we're almost 2 hours into the meeting. If we can kind of just give a push to get through the presentation. I know there's a lot of valid questions, good questions, but there's still a long way to go. If we could get through, if there's a pressing question, certainly chime in, but if the question can wait, maybe we can let Gordon just get through the options so we can discuss them. Go ahead, Gordon.
Okay. So obviously, as we're looking to start the year, and we've talked about it quite a few times here, we know that our students are going to need support socially and emotionally, and that's going to be part of our focus within the first few weeks, whether it be in a hybrid or in full remote, as comes later on in this document. And we're going to provide professional development. We've already worked with NCCJ, but we're also going to be adding developmental designs to help us with this and make sure that our teachers are prepared to do this well and to do this successfully. Obviously, during the in-person days, we've already talked about the safety protocols. Wednesday, we gave or had quite a bit of discussion earlier on this, but just to give you an idea of what those Wednesdays will look like, is that our elementary students will receive live instruction on Wednesdays, and their classroom teacher may break that up between, say, if they start the day at 8:15, which is the start at Mountain View and Maple Shade, and they're running their literacy block, it may not be 2 hours straight with that teacher, but they would run their literacy block. They would have live instruction there. Then that may be broken up with specialists and specials teachers also running live instruction. And then later in that schedule, the core classroom teacher would be coming back, providing whether it be the math block or another block of live teaching. One of the things we are looking to add this year is providing parents with office hours so that we can answer some of the questions. These are some of the things that I believe were asked for at the end of last year, just communicating and how we answer questions, especially on remote learning, because it's all new to our families and certainly something that we're engaging in now for the second time after this spring going at it for the very first time ever. The live teaching throughout the day, as I said, is going to be broken up between subjects and professionals. Special education teachers will be, and I think Dr. Welch mentioned this, providing services, as well as interventionists and counselors will be connecting. At the secondary level, it's going to look very similar to a regular day schedule, obviously modified somewhat, but classes that would be running will be set up in that schedule, and teachers will be meeting with students at the high school and middle school, teaching those courses that they're scheduled in. And then we would also have the specials and or electives within that schedule as well. Some of the things that we have to take into account, especially in the younger grades, but really in all grades, is that we're going to have to schedule breaks. It's challenging to, especially at the younger levels, to keep students going, say, for 45 straight minutes in a remote live teaching setting. So they're going to have to schedule breaks. They may have to break up things, into 30-minute segments, and then provide some independent work while they're still offering assistance should students need it. But that's something that our buildings are working on and looking to make sure that we have these breaks put in place. In some cases throughout the day, it will be somewhat guided breaks or brain breaks, if you will, where, just building into the day movement and so forth to make sure that, we're keeping students healthy and engaged and attentive.
Greg, I'm sorry, but I do have another question, and it's specific to this. I'm confused because when we talk about at least 2 scheduled times from their classroom teacher. Mm-hmm. So again, who's making that decision of if it's more? And if there are, let's say, 4 core academic subjects, math, science, social studies, and math, and reading, how do we then say that on a Wednesday, kids are only going to potentially get access to math and reading or science and reading? Who's making those decisions as to what children are getting access to on Wednesday if they're only required to meet with the child twice? And then who's deciding the length of time? And if a teacher is it a teacher deciding that they're going to meet with their kids 4 times and it's 4 half-hour blocks, and then another teacher decides something different?
Each building actually has an instructional planning group that is branched off the district instructional planning larger group. And so they're working on those schedules and working on what that individual day looks like.
Across a grade level or across a building? I just know there were discrepancies, and I'm not saying what we did during remote learning the first time was not strong. We did the best given the situation that the hand that we were dealt. But we have time now, and we have potentially even more time based on DESE making this 170 day academic year. So how do we, I guess that is what I'm asking then. Do we have consistency across grade 3, consistency across kindergartens, that all teachers are doing the same thing for all kindergartners, all 6th graders, all 5th graders?
And that's what the building instructional planning groups are working on, to make sure that we're not having disjointed grade levels or expectations. And so they're working on making sure that those schedules are uniform.
Is Mountain View and Maple Shade kind of working together? Because I know they kind of do their own thing. They're aligned, but they kind of just passed. Are they working together?
They are actually all 3 elementary schools. After they meet with their building planning, instructional planning group, they're also then meeting as administrators and coordinating things. So we're trying to make all of that much more coordinated than it was in the spring, because that's something that we certainly heard from our families, to make sure that we have an expected uniform schedule, and that people know what to expect at what time.
So then I guess, where did the at least 2 come from? Like, is 2 going to be an expectation for a grade level? Because that, again, would be concerning, that a child is only meeting with a teacher for maybe 40 minutes on a day when they typically would have been in school for 6 hours.
Yeah, so that would be their classroom teacher, but also remember, during those 6 hours, you have specials teachers, you have other activities going on. And so that's something that what they're trying to do is put the schedule within that Wednesday so that we can get as many of those activities and subjects accomplished as possible.
Okay. I think that it's hard for us, again, to make a decision not seeing what those schedules look like, because I don't know what I'm truthfully opting children into across a district if I don't see those schedules and can say in good faith that a 5th grader is going to meet with their teacher, for upwards of 2.5 hours on a Wednesday with what I'm seeing right now. That's me. That's my opinion.
I don't disagree with you, Sarah. I think part of the problem is, and I give everybody who's worked on this credit, unfortunately, DESE they're a moving target at this point. I mean, every time they turn around, something's changing and nobody knows. And I know I worked in a school as a para. We were not utilized. I was upset about the entire situation. I was on Zoom calls that made me want to cry by the end of them. And this is just a difficult situation. I have trust in that the building principals will do their best, and hopefully maybe once we've chosen something, they can come to us with a more defined schedule once they know exactly which way they're going. I mean, I guess that's the best under the circumstances that maybe we could get.
They actually are building schedules, and those are things that we're working on this week. This is giving sort of the overarching outline of the whole model.
But unfortunately, it kind of puts us into a bad position, because we've got information and you guys are doing a great job, but I'm not sure if it's enough information, and we're going to be kind of backed into a corner to make a decision here.
So again, we're almost at 2 hours. We have a lot to get through. I know everybody has a lot of questions. I'm never one to stifle questions. You all know that. I totally encourage it. What I'd like to do tonight is get through at least the 2 options. And if we need to have another meeting to have further discussion, I certainly want to do that as well. So if we could kind of just try to plug away through this, we're almost to the first option. If we can try to get through the second option, I'd appreciate it. If you have to ask a question, go ahead. But if we can kind of try to cruise through this a little bit, that would be helpful, I think.
I agree.
Okay.
Go ahead, Gordon. Thank you.
Just a couple highlights as we go through here. Right now, as our platform, we'll be utilizing Google Meet. Zoom was something that we had a free account that I think most districts had a free account to. And so we will probably be utilizing Google Meet as our meeting tool. And we'll have professional development. They have developed some new tools in there to capture attendance, and some of the differences, obviously, between not only the Wednesday remote learning, but also in the full remote model. Attendance is going to be taken, which is something that was not recorded necessarily in the spring, but as we start up the school year, that's going to be taken every day, whether it be remote or in person. And assignments will be graded and term grades eventually will be issued. So those are some changes that would be different from, say, what we were doing in the spring to what we're moving into as we begin the school year. The other piece with, in remote learning, obviously, is we still want to have the direct instruction and also make collaborative learning to the extent possible in remote learning. One of the things that's on our Chromebooks and was not utilized uniformly, but we hope to utilize more consistently and will provide professional development on this, is this idea of the knee top control, which does allow teachers to freeze the screens of students who are using their Chromebooks, so that if we're all looking at something and it's important that we're going through that together, that students aren't moving off to other things on their Chromebooks. And so I know that some of our high school teachers were using that, and I believe some of our middle school teachers, but we'd like to use that throughout all grade levels. And so we'll be providing much more professional development on this. As we talked earlier.
Really quickly around Zoom, there was a parent comment about it.
Yep.
One of the things we found out with Zoom is that breakout rooms are not supported on Chromebooks. And that was one of the biggest features we wanted to utilize. So when Mr. Smith talks about some of the new features on Google Meets, thankfully, there are new extensions that allow for breakout rooms as well. So to take on Zoom and not be able to have those small group features would be not really useful. Sorry.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. I can't, when I am sharing my screen, I can't see everybody. So feel free to chime in whenever you feel you can answer a question like that. It's beautiful. So moving into that, these are things that will differentiate what we were doing at the end of the spring into this new school year. Some of the things that we had talked about earlier, the platforms that we're using and students will be able to go to in terms of where assignments and information will be available will be Google Classroom, grades 3 through 12, and Bloom's in K-2. And then in terms of collaborative tools, some of the things that we'll be providing professional development on will be, most of our teachers, actually all of our teachers know how to use Google Docs, but Kami is a new feature for PDFs that can allow for commenting and highlighting and note-taking, annotating the documents, which we hope to be able to utilize across the district. Google Read and Write, Equatio, MathSpace, these are all tools that should help us communicate and provide faster feedback to our students as we go through any given instructional unit or lesson. I don't know, Mrs. Brown, if that's something you want to add to.
Just that the other online tools are useful for the Google Read and Write allows for text to be read to students' vocal comments, and the Equatio MathSpace allows for collaborative math work as well as just digital math that students can get feedback from their teachers on. It's a nice platform for doing math digitally.
Okay, thank you. So obviously on Wednesdays, there's going to also be time for others to connect. We had talked about this earlier in the chart. Special educators will be able to, and paras, as Dr. Welsh talked about, might be able to lend small group support. Our counselors will be connecting with students, and we'll be utilizing our academic coaches as well to help support students across the different grade levels. One of the things that we do know our students across the Commonwealth and in most cases across the country have been out of in-person school since roughly March 13th. So we know that there are going to be gaps in learning. And so one of the things that we're immediately talking with our teachers about is how do we and when do we identify where these gaps might be so that we can target instruction better for individual students. And so we will be using things like the iReady diagnostic. And as we begin our school year, even though this may not happen in the very first week, we'll be working with our students to get them prepared to take these probably in smaller doses than what they might experience were we to have them 5 days a week in school. Because some of this may take place with different supervisors who might be working with the classroom teacher on those off days in smaller chunks so that they can take the diagnostic at home, and then we can use it to prepare and target in-person learning better. At the 9 through 12, it may be the use of Albert IO as well as possibly using Edgenuity for some help in this area. One of the other things that we're trying to build in, and we were somewhat successful in building this in for staff in the spring, is we know how valuable, especially in this format, collaborative planning is, as well as our multi-tiered support system time in looking at how our students are doing and reviewing some of the student information and data that we have to provide the best support and academic intervention. So we're going to be trying to build that in on a weekly basis during or within this hybrid model. And then one of the things, and I know Mrs. Brown can give you more information on this, that we're going to be utilizing is this panorama dashboard, which allows teachers to have at their fingertips a variety of information on their students, and so that teams can use this quickly to start to break down where students may need additional support and or instruction. I don't know, Mrs. Brown, if you want to add, or did I just take?
No, I mean, you said it. It allows us to have academic information as well as social emotional information, and look at attendance as well, which will help us with seeing who, helping us to identify students who are not engaging in the remote learning, and also obviously in-person learning, as we always have. And the teams at each school had already been working really hard to reach out to families where students were not attending those virtual sessions.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do the students that opt out, do they still take the diagnostics?
And we could certainly set that up.
Yeah, we are looking at using that NetTop in order to monitor student screens, and also if we do the diagnostic with kids in like a Google Meet, then we can also monitor how antsy they're getting, and just, like we would in a classroom, say, okay, we can shut this off for now, because iReady you can give that in like Mr. Smith was saying, smaller increments. So the plan is to provide this diagnostic for folks at home, but in a kind of monitored, facilitated environment.
With the students, though, that take the diagnostic that are opting out, they won't have an instructor to differentiate their instruction to whatever they didn't do well on the diagnostic.
Well, that was the idea for the the at-home days, the small group learning and supports. So, obviously after this conversation, there's more ironing out to do around the full group instruction, but they certainly would be getting small group instruction around their needs.
I think you might be talking about two different things.
Yeah, I'm talking about the students that are opting out.
Oh,
Right.
For
So
remote.
if we certainly can schedule the diagnostic, and if we're able to coordinate Edgenuity similar to the way we've talked about this evening, then we would be able to utilize that information to make that a little bit more of a coordinated and connected program for students who may be opting out.
Edgenuity also has built-in diagnostic and pre-assessments.
And this was the tool or the chart that I think Mrs. Trulio was talking about. This basically is to provide hopefully a little bit clearer idea of where parents can look and students can look for assignments and what we're doing across different grade levels. So as you look at the different guidance documents, one of the recommendations was, and we actually had already put it in place last spring, was provide your families and your students a single sign-on to get to all these different tools. And so we've utilized Clever, and that's something we'll continue to utilize so that once students log in through Clever, they have at their access the different personalized learning tools that they might be utilizing at a specific grade level. In terms of management platforms, where assignments will be posted and where students can look, we had talked about throughout this presentation that K through 2 is using Bloom's and 3 through 5, as well as really 3 through 12 is using Google Classroom. We've talked about that our video meeting domain is Google Meet. And then these were some of the tools that I think Mrs. Trulio had referenced earlier around personalized learning tools that we use. And we've used when we've been in full in-person in previous years, ST Math, Lexia, iReady. iReady was a little bit newer the last year, year and a half, but it's something that our students are familiar with and have been using over the last year. At the middle level, we have a number of things that are connected with remote support, such as in science, Amplify and Albert I.O. There's social studies, history curriculum is connected to the History Alive and iCivics. Math, they have the iReady Math, Envisions, and Albert I.O. that they've utilized at the middle level. And the last few years, they've been using News ELEA, as well as Albert I.O. and iReady for ELA.
So this chart feels like it's in a little bit of conflict with information around taking the diagnostic. So as a district, we pay for both the diagnostic and the assessment side of iReady, but we also pay for the instructional side of iReady. Mm-hmm. So if we're asking our students to take the iReady diagnostic in grades K to 8, and yet in grades K to 5, we're not asking them to use iReady Math, nor in K to 2 where are we asking them to use iReady Reading. So now, why are they taking the diagnostic then?
The 3 to 5 does have iReady Math. That was a mistype.
Okay.
And in terms of the diagnostic, while yes, it does help them on that online learning path, it also provides information for the teachers to use. There are school districts that have the diagnostic without the online learning.
I know that, but we didn't. We bought both. So that's why I'm confused. If we made the purchase to buy both, why aren't we using it?
We did not buy both at the K to 2 level.
Okay.
Folks felt like Lexia was more developmentally appropriate for K to 2 students. Before all of this happened, ST Math was the primary online personalized learning tool, especially around the grant that we have to, that pays for it and also requires a certain amount of minutes on it per week.
So we're using solely the diagnostic data to identify gaps in K to 2.
The diagnostic data and also the information that we get from Lexia and ST Math.
And then last question on this chart is, my understanding was Envisions was a pilot last year. Did that move forward as a curriculum purchase?
We were not able to have the curriculum renewal process happen because it was because of COVID. Mm-hmm. So they're going to do one more year of piloting so that we can go through the official process with the school committee next year.
And do we make a determination if we are piloting something against Envisions? Because a pilot, we should have more than one curriculum to compare. I was
that-
just surprised when I saw only Envisions listed there as a core curriculum.
I think the comparison would be to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Brown, to the Eureka math curriculum, because that's what they were using prior to the Envisions pilot.
The idea was, with everything being flipped around, to ask the teachers to learn a whole new system in these times would be trying. But it's certainly something we could think about before a curriculum renewal happens, since that's been postponed.
Okay.
Okay. So moving further, basically taking what we saw on Wednesdays, if you pull that into a full remote learning model, obviously we're still, even within the remote learning model, looking to support our students socially and emotionally. So that's something that we'll be talking about. Should we go to a full remote learning model? How to do that best, and certainly have professional development around that. Basically, when you go to a full remote learning model, you're taking what is their regular schedule, you're modifying it slightly, and then following that regular schedule Monday through Friday in a remote fashion. So as we talked about, students will be receiving live instruction at the elementary level. They'll also be receiving their specials live at the elementary level throughout the week. And in a full remote model, our special education teachers and counselors and interventionists will also be put into a student schedule to make sure that we're meeting student needs across the week. Now it's in a full remote situation, similar to actually the summer school, where our special educators were working in a remote fashion. At the middle school level and the high school level, you're taking their courses and their schedule, and again, you're basically following a typical schedule for a given day: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You may modify it slightly, but basically students would expect that their courses that they would see in person will be the courses that they will see in a remote model. And then other things that we would have to think about are some of the things that we had talked about earlier in the presentation, is just when you build in breaks, how do you build in extra support and or what I think the high school referred to and the middle school referred to as office hours, so that students have the opportunity not only to have the larger group instruction, but also times to connect with their teachers in a smaller setting and get extra help. And so those will be scheduled throughout a given week, and actually something that the high school and the middle school scheduled toward the end of the spring in our remote model last spring. A lot of this is somewhat repetitive in the fact that we talked about it under the Wednesday. But I don't know if people have questions on that.
So if we were to go with a hybrid option, because I want to go back to the pacing concern for a moment. If we were to go with a hybrid option and we quickly had to pivot, change course, move to a remote only option, how then again do we bring those two cohorts of, really three cohorts of kids back together? Because now if the whole district moves to remote, you've got these kids who have opted out, who haven't been on pace at all. They've been doing their own thing, absent of instruction, who then should be able to come back into a fully remote without any reason why they shouldn't be able to opt back into that if the whole district moves that way. Mm-hmm. Or if you have two separate cohorts with the A week, B week, how do they then pivot when they come all back to being fully remote?
So, I mean, those are the questions similar to when you had asked that earlier in the presentation, that they're working out at the building level to try to figure out how do they coordinate that. No, it's an excellent question. And so that's something obviously that we'll get into further detail this week to make sure that we're doing that. In terms of students who have completely opted out, if we're able to tailor Edgenuity in a similar way to the way you had talked about, that might make it an easier transition back in. The way the state has talked about that in the different conference calls is if you have students or families who are opting out, and your district is focused on whether it be a full in-person model or a hybrid, here's the platform, or a platform should be provided that can be somewhat self-paced and offers a robust curriculum. And so that's what we were looking to do. If we can coordinate that further with what we're doing in terms of our instructional planning in the hybrid, then certainly we will do that.
So along those same lines, Gordon, in a particular school or cohort, we receive information about a positive COVID test. What would then happen?
So one of the things that we had mentioned earlier or talked about earlier when we discussed the operations group as well as the leadership team. So both of those planning groups have looked at the different, what they call COVID protocols. And, similar to, I think Mrs. Trulio had asked about someone at the bus stop. Each protocol looks at a situation similar to that. Should we learn of an individual who may have been exposed outside of school, and we can quickly move to make contact with that family and keep the individual from coming into school, that obviously would be the ideal. If you learn of this information, and this is something that all schools will have to work very closely with their local health department on, because it's the local health department that learns first about a positive case. Once they alert us, then we would work to, one, take the student or student, and each building, in addition to their regular health room, has to have an identified COVID room, and we would support that student there, and then start making the contacts. And basically what the protocols call for is you immediately look to anyone who is within 6 feet of that individual. It could also, given that you might have movement in classrooms, that you're looking to possibly that entire cohort may have to quarantine for up to 14 days. There are steps in there that people can look to get a test within 4 to 5 days, and should that come back negative, they might be able to return. But the basic rule of thumb, if they're not going to get tested, is that they would be quarantining for those 14 days. In the case of students and staff, if they're asymptomatic, they might be able to still, in terms of staff, work remotely. And certainly we would work to keep students supported remotely as they are quarantining for those 14 days. But it will be a challenge.
So what platform would that be, Gordon, if an entire cohort has to quarantine for 14 days?
I mean, basically you're moving that group to more of a remote situation that we would have to manage. And if it gets larger, you might have to have that entire school quarantine.
Right.
They don't go into that kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, doomsday scenario, but you have to take your contact tracing as far out as it needs to go.
So I think it would be naive of us to think that no student or no staff member will ever come in contact with someone or be diagnosed with a positive COVID diagnosis. Does that lead us towards the remote model completely? Because if we have some sort of distraction, or we need to quarantine half the population at one time, or I don't know, entire school based on the staff member even, are we prepared to go from a hybrid directly to a completely remote model from one day to the next? Would that be an option?
For an entire school to go to a remote, could we? Yes, I suppose we
have to,
could.
right.
I think at least the way the scenarios play out, you're dealing more with a group of, let's say, 10 to 15 initially, if you're talking at the elementary level. At the secondary level, that group gets larger. So yeah, you may have to pivot and move into supporting remote learning relatively quickly.
Right.
And it's something that we have to plan for regardless. I wish I had better answers on all of these.
Yeah.
How do we work the IEPs as far as, okay, maybe you could do speech online. How do you support OT and PT? That's just one question I have that I thought maybe Joanne could help. Like, what will we do if we go all remote? Are these kids going to have scheduled times to come into school? Are they going to make appointments? I mean,
they certainly could. I think that would be one option, and it would be an option that, I'd like to support. Obviously, I think those are related services that are probably, depending upon the student, are probably best served directly and in person. I would also say during the closure, we did have some success with providing some of those services remotely through either live sessions that were done in collaboration with parents and students, through the posting of some lessons and videos. But you're absolutely right. There are certainly some related services that lend themselves better to being provided directly. And given that, again, we certainly have staff, but if it were necessary, that might be an area where we might need to supplement what we can do with some other services.
okay. And another big concern I have a big concern with all of it, but like at the high school level, are they gonna do advisories? Is there gonna be a way where there's a cohort of kids, of students and a teacher, like we would normally have, but maybe at a, I know that they don't get together with their classrooms often, but are we looking into anything where they touch base in the morning, with one, staff member who's part of their advisory, make sure people are there, they're ready to work, they're, I don't know, just to make sure. My big thing with our students never going back is there's kids out there that are not in good home situations. And how are we going to find this out? DCF is down 50% of the students that are being notified, that are being found. They're down 50%. These kids are in houses and we have no control. And I'm not a big person that we're here to raise people's kids, but some kids need help. And how are we going to, if we never see these kids? I understand this is impossible, but they are my biggest concern. I know it shouldn't be, because we want our kids to learn and grow, and we got our K through 2 that are just learning how to read, and how do we not teach them that well? I guess that's a concern for me. How do we reach out to the kids that are in need for us to see them?
Beth, I can tell you from my own experience that I think many of our staff did an exemplary job of identifying areas of concern, which we did follow up on. DCF is still working. They're not necessarily going into people's homes, but I can say personally that I've had numerous conversations with them, and that to the best of their ability, they have also worked collaboratively with us to make sure that our kids' needs were met and that our kids' needs were safe. I guess this would be a good time for me to give a shout out to our staff, who communicates with me all the time, and who definitely did a really great job of picking up on some of those red flags and areas of concern.
I know. I've been on Zoom meetings with students and I'm sitting there watching it, texting the teacher going, are you going to let someone know? And she's like, I'm on it. And I mean, that's a scary thought. It's just, it's, you know, putting aside just how it is we are going to get our kids what they need.
Sure.
All right.
And to Dr.
But
Welsh.
I would like to see, I'm sorry, I would like to see advisories put in place. I would like to see that there's a contact person. Going to Sarah's point, I mean, you know, we might make a decision tonight and what were we going to do, but then it would be good to see, you know, an outline of how a day is going to go. And I think that would be very helpful to us.
Right. To the point that you were asking in terms of outreach and support, and to expand on what Dr. Welsh was saying, one of the things that we did have in place in the spring, and we'll have it even more in place as we start school, is that we have not only our counselors, but also our adjustment counselors, and we were working through Kelly's work, Kelly LeBombard, our nurse leader. She had some home caseworkers. All of this group is working to connect with families if we start to see any red flags. And so it's communicating that and keeping that communication going throughout with that support group that makes the support happen for.
I guess I feel like that's why I think every student in our school system is going to have circle time in the morning. Just to sit down and take a look at them. And, you know, the parents can get the serving of the breakfast done during advisory so they're ready to learn when classes start. I just think it's a way to, you know, I hope that is part of the schedule.
Advisory has been part of the middle school experience, so I can't imagine why they would at all take that away, especially with the social emotional needs. The developmental designs, professional development is actually Chip Wood, who was one of the founders of Responsive Classroom, founded Developmental Designs. And so all of the elementary teachers will be getting, if they haven't had responsive classroom training in the past, you know, some real training on how to have those morning meetings and ideas and things, because like you said, it's so important for us to build those relationships. And in this kind of situation, it makes it harder, but the kids need that.
And I hope that the through high school gets it too. I mean, these kids are missing out, as we know, on a lot. And I just think that even touching base at that high school level is really important too. And
they're not getting developmental design, and CCJ will help with this. Sorry. I said they're not going to get developmental designs per se, but they will be getting to work with NCCJ, who will help us a lot with that. So,
all right, you know, just somebody that, so it's just to get them, and you know, I want you guys to be thinking about the after school activities that happen at the high school level that these kids need to even succeed as they go into college, even though I know college is going to be a whole different thing by the time they get there too. And that's something that I would like to see as we move forward with planning.
Question on if we were to go fully remote, would our teachers be teaching from their classrooms?
I think many of our teachers, we hadn't mandated that yet, but I think many of our teachers would. They wanted to do this actually in the spring when our buildings were closed. So I think probably that's something that we will iron out this week in terms of making that happen if we go fully remote. The Wednesdays, they would not be, because that actually, in a hybrid model, that's when we would be doing more intensive cleaning of all our classrooms between cohorts.
Yes, but if we were fully remote, that's on the table right now in terms of the teachers coming into their classroom so they have access to all of their supplies, materials, all of the technology that they might need in order to actualize instruction for students in a fully remote fashion.
Sure. Yep. That's something that...
And on top of that, I'm also trying to provide a lot of things that they can do digitally. So, you know, some of the manipulatives, for example, that students might use in a classroom, they'll have access to digitally. I'm not saying it replaces a classroom by any means, but we are thinking about that as well.
And has that been communicated to the ELEA as of yet?
It's been just something that we've started to discuss, but we haven't gotten into the specifics of things like manipulatives and that kind of thing.
I meant more that teachers would be teaching from their classroom. Sorry, Gordon.
That's okay. Something that we certainly will be discussing with them as we continue through this week and the next. Yeah.
Now, is that something where, like if, say, for instance, 100% they should be doing their job during their time, but if they're not feeling well, all these other things, but they are still capable of working, are they, I didn't like how our teachers could never go into their classroom this past spring and to get what they need. But do we also, if they're, want to keep them working and they're not feeling well, or there's a situation in their family, will it be okay too? Is that going to be discussed for they work
I think
for a period of time?
Yeah, I didn't mean to talk over you. The rule of thumb, going back to the second or third sheet in this presentation, is we all have to think about the safety protocols, and the very first thing that has to be on our mind is how we keep ourselves and others safe. So if there's any possibility that they're not feeling well, whether it's COVID or not, they shouldn't come in. That's student, staff, whomever. When in doubt, if you're feeling ill, stay home.
Gordon, I'm sure a question on a lot of folks' minds also would be after-school activities, sports, clubs, and the like. In both the hybrid model and the remote model, I certainly see hurdles in terms of bringing full teams or full clubs into the school when they're not here during the day. Is it fair to say that at this point, based on these two models, at least for the fall, we wouldn't necessarily look for after-school activities?
There wouldn't be a number of after-school activities, certainly, in either one of these models. We haven't gotten final guidance on what might be allowed in terms of athletics. The commissioner did say, however, though, if we were to go to a full remote model, or any district, not us in particular, he was talking to over 400 people, that if a district chooses to go fully remote, he would find it challenging then that they could in any way do extracurricular activities, athletics, and whatever it might be, because we're saying that it's safer for everybody to stay at home.
Right.
Well, students could still have student council meetings. They could still do the Spartan Spectator.
You could do that stuff remotely,
your
certainly.
empty yearbook of pictures of Zoom. There's still,
I think he was talking about the in-person stuff.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, just put everything into context. MIAA has not come out with guidance for fall sports yet. They kind of tabled it and they're waiting.
I think that they're waiting, since I'm on the board of directors, I know that they're waiting for the governor's task force and the commissioner's task force to outline what's going to be allowed. That's why the last decision was to table it, and this was prior to the commissioner waiving the 10 days of the 180, to wait till September 14th for the fall season to even begin. But as you know, I think with youth sports, they've adjusted what might be sort of a moderate risk and a high risk. And I think soccer moved into the moderate risk. So I'm not really sure what that's going to mean for athletics, nor am I really sure exactly what the reference meant when he said, well, if because I think the governor and the department are pushing as much in person right now as possible. And so that's certainly something that we're thinking about, because we know it's good for kids to be back in school. And unfortunately, we just can't do the full in-person and put the full safeguards that we need to put in place on an everyday basis, which forced us into looking more at the hybrid.
Right.
So,
does this have to be an all or none? If maybe it's harder to do the hybrid at the younger ages, but I don't see why we can't do it at the high school level. And I don't know about Birchland, but I don't know. Does it have to be? Could we say, okay, we feel the high school students are old enough and capable to keep their masks on, apply to do this, and at least get them in to have, I don't know. Does it have to be all or none? You know,
So I'm not exactly sure I'm following the question, but
could we do
I-
hybrid for the high school and at home for the younger students if we feel the younger students need to have the cohesiveness, like Sarah was saying, of having the step by step of how the curriculum goes. They might need to have at home, so they're learning something every day and they're working upon that. Whereas a high school student can be given a directive and just come back once or twice a week, you know, get some school learning, possibly be, if they're the cohort that's home, they could be watching a Zoom meeting of what's happening, or you know, Chrome meeting, that they're more capable of doing it hybrid than like the smaller kids could. You're not understanding?
No, I'm understanding. I'm trying to answer the question. I think the guidance is that districts are supposed to try to stay as uniform within one of those models as possible, but certainly in the end, school committees in Massachusetts have the local control and authority to make the determination as to what the educational program will be. We have not been planning in that way, so that would be a shift in our own planning. In discussions with staff and so forth.
All right.
To the similar question, Gordon, we might want to think about as well. Perhaps we could do the hybrid model for a short term, a defined term, say even 2 weeks, get the students in, meet their teachers, have a little socialization, learn the routines and the expectations, and then have a set date that we go completely remote. Because as we all know, the virus is a fluid situation. Massachusetts is a relatively low percentage of the virus, but it's certainly apt to flare, and perhaps it would be better for us to prepare to go remote and have a set date to do that, but still get a chance to get the kids in a little bit for that little bit of socialization. I don't know if that's worth doing, if that defeats the purpose of one or the other, but just something I was thinking about.
Sure. I mean, I think probably the most challenging piece to all of this is that it's all new. None of us have been through this before. And so we're trying to put the best plans together to support our families and our students and our staff. And we also know, to the point you just made, Mr. Thompson, that this stuff is fluid. You know, we certainly learned from this summer that states that thought they had it under control may have opened up too quickly, and all of a sudden they weren't. The virus wasn't under control. And so that's certainly something that we have to keep in mind.
And I think that's where some of that data, where we started our conversation, would be good to have. What did infection rates look like at the peak in our community? Since now the state has not made a decision, like they said they were going to at the onset of this, for the entire state, and they're leaving it up to local authorities to make these decisions. Then if we look at the context of East Long Meadow at the height of the virus,
sure,
what effects was it actually having on our community in terms of an infection rate? Did we ever see 5%?
Well, Gordon, you had a number total cases.
278 total. Yeah.
How many?
278.
278, and how many people? 14,000.
In East Long Meadow, yeah, I think we're
A little bit higher.
15,000.
Yeah,
Between January 1st and May 20th, I saw there was 238 cases.
So we're actually higher now.
We've added about 40 since then.
So that's a little less than 2%. So I would say if we're hovering at 1, Sarah, we wouldn't have gotten much over 2.5%, 3% at the most, and that's just a mathematical.
Yes. So, but when you think about national guidance saying that 5% is the threshold, just to make to your point, Greg.
I don't want to put out a sort of a misnomer. That I don't know if that's the 5% national guidance. That was just something that the commissioner had used and said that I think the national teachers unions had said from a country standpoint that they would need to see under 5% to go back in person. Yeah. So.
But to the point of it all, we know that there have been students that have been infected, those that are been under 18 years old. We don't know that they're specifically students. We don't know their names or anything. So the likeliness of someone getting this is quite probable, I would say, in the population, either of the staff or the students. So I don't know. It's almost an inevitability, which
To
is
piggyback on what Greg said, with a transition to have the kids come in, meet the teachers, get the curriculum, get comfortable, and then go remote. We as a committee could always throw this out too and say, we're going to go remote, let's say from October 1st through Christmas, and then revisit and see where all the numbers actually are. And we could go to a hybrid model or even a little bit further after the holidays. I mean, I think there's a lot of options on the table still, and we're still shooting at a moving target. And I'm not sure how much has changed from, let's say, March 13th to where we are today, and how much more it's going to change going forward.
so. I'll say, Bill.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we're going on 3 hours now. I don't know if folks are ready for a decision. I know we'd like to get some information to parents as soon as possible, families, so they can start preparing. It appears we may have some more questions, some more ideas we might want to explore. Is it plausible or possible or reasonable for us to schedule another meeting soon, perhaps this week, and now perhaps develop some questions? Or Sarah, you had mentioned some individuals you'd like to attend, a list of those folks, and then coordinate that for potentially a Thursday meeting.
Our decision is due to the state, correct me if I'm wrong, by August 10th?
Next Monday, correct. So that's why Thursday would probably be a good target to meet again.
I'm up for that. I don't think I'm ready. I don't know.
I'm looking for more information. I agree. I think we should probably come back and revisit this, and Thursday would be the earliest and possibly the latest that we could do it.
So what I've written down is schedules. Folks are looking for examples of schedules, both for the hybrid model and the remote model. Sarah, you talked about some individuals who might want to attend, or is there someone in particular?
I mean, I think to the points of the earlier aspects of the plan, I do think having the Department of Health, Amy Pachowski here, I think might be beneficial for families to hear. I agree with the individuals in the chat that us speculating around numbers is not the most beneficial, that the Director of Health should be here to address that concern. I think hearing just some additional information regarding the protocols, if we were to go hybrid, regarding the cleaning and the sanitizing of the buildings. I think hearing what the plan is for kids to get food is going to be if they are leaving the classroom, if the food is being delivered to them. So having food services here, I think there are a number of factors that play into the decision making beyond just the academics. The logistics of running a school looks dramatically different, and to be able to hear from those individuals be critical, as well as I think the union should be here. I mean, if this is impacting the educators, then is there representation from the unions that feels like they should be answering some of those questions or discussing some of those points? Because I think that each one of these stakeholders plays a role and is pivotal to our decision making. And regardless of what we decide, I think the families who are going to be making decisions as to whether or not they're opting their child out also deserve to hear from these individuals, to be able to hear specifics regarding those pieces of information.
And I would like to just know the logistics of maybe what if we did do a hybrid model at the older levels, but not at the younger levels, and the younger levels were full at home. I know that's hard for families. I get it. But what is best for the students and the education that we're giving them? You know, I'd like to say, let's do hybrid with the elementary kids, but I don't know how I feel about that. So I guess just to ask if it's even possible.
And we have started to open some things back up in town. Youth sports have begun to open back up under strict protocols. Have we seen a spike in infection rates since they've opened up? Have we seen anything happening based on athletics, like I mentioned, or there's been camps run by the rec department where children are interacting with individuals? Have we seen any kind of change based on those that opening up of our community. It's happening. I mean, it is happening, and it's happening under the guise of our local government. It's happening under the rec department. It's happening through camp. So, and that involves the same population that we're talking about. The pool's open at Pine Knoll. Like, are we seeing any kind of indication that that's having an impact on the health and well-being of students and of families? Because they're not wearing a mask when they're in the pool. So if we can get that information, and maybe that means we have to ask the rec department if they're looking at those statistics, if they're gathering information. And I'm not saying they are, but at the same time, you know, we do have kids wearing masks when they're playing baseball in our community, and they're outdoors, but they're wearing masks and they're sharing a baseball. So what is that looking like in terms of our community at large? And I understand it's outdoor spaces, but they also are not always 6 feet apart. So being able to at least hear a little bit more about that and what has been successful in that.
One of my biggest concerns is what will happen, and it was talked about earlier, if somebody in a cohort tests positive. What do you do? What is the protocol? How do we, if it explodes, what do we, are we going to close a building down? I'd like to know what all of that looks like, because inevitably it's going to happen. Somebody's going to get sick. I mean, we're not in a bubble here. That's one of my concerns, a big concern.
But I think to your original question, Greg, no, I don't think we're at a point where we can make a decision tonight. I think we need to schedule another meeting.
We do.
And I agree with that.
Okay, is there anything else that folks would like for that meeting? I've written down, I believe, everything that everyone just asked for.
I'm going to think about it tonight, and I'm going to, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, good point. So let me know in the next 2 days. Are folks available Thursday night?
Yes.
What time?
6 o'clock again?
Do you want to?
Yeah, we would have to get that. We'll post it tomorrow. It would have to be posted tomorrow.
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Do you want to still look at the calendar?
Yeah, we can look at that. Let's look at that, please.
In your packets, you have an adjusted calendar based on the commissioner's waiving of the 180-day requirement for students just this year and waiving it to 170. With that, that provided us 10 additional days to plan, which the commissioner has asked districts to use prior to the start of the school year with students. So that would move our start date for students to Wednesday, September 16th.
Okay. And is that the only change we have in the calendar, Gordon? Correct?
That's the only change we have. We are recognizing holidays and so forth, just to make people aware. But it's not changing the school calendar per se.
And the staff would still start on what date?
Staff would still come back on August 31st.
One question. The Juneteenth holiday in June, it's actually the 19th, which is technically the makeup days. Does that change? If we were to extend all of the snow days, does that change the 23rd being the last day of school, given that holiday being celebrated on a Friday?
So I don't know that it's actually celebrated on a Friday. We need more information on that. That was just recently recognized in one of the governor's announcements, but there's been no indication at the state level whether they are going to observe that on Friday. So we probably should actually take that out of the parentheses. Still want to recognize Juneteenth, but we don't know right now if the state's taking that as a recognized holiday on the Friday before, or whether they're just recognizing it on the actual date itself.
And do we have to take recognized holidays off? Like I know, like Bunker Hill Day, I think the state
Well, it's a Suffolk County
that off,
holiday.
but we're not taking that off. Do we have to take?
I don't know that the whole state takes Bunker Hill, but Boston may. The Boston
That's a Suffolk.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and I'm not saying to not.
So we would follow,
right at the end of the year,
obviously,
it's a tough day.
anything that the governor decides is a state holiday where public offices are closed, we would then follow suit.
Okay.
Right now, we don't have information as to whether they're going to close public offices on that Friday before.
Okay.
So that's somewhat of a wait and see. We wanted to recognize the holiday. We don't know if it's going to be observed on that Friday before.
So we take Patriots Day off because the state's offices are closed.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's actually, it always falls into our April vacation anyway.
Right, right. Okay.
Bunker
I'm
Hill
gonna go back
Day
to
is-
the, oh,
Bunker
Sorry,
Hill
Bill.
is just no, that's okay. Bunker Hill, just for perspective, is only a Suffolk County holiday.
I mean, I understand that, and I mean, I get it, but it's still considered a state holiday, you know what I mean? So I was just trying to figure out how we
No, I just, it's not, it's a state holiday, but it doesn't affect the entire state. It affects one county.
Right, right. Yeah.
This could be a civics lesson in and of itself.
It
Yeah,
could
no
be.
kidding.
so I'm going to go back to the half days, as I guess you can imagine. So right now, we're already looking at 170 days of instructional time. That's down 10 days. The half days were a concern to me prior to the 170. So if we are at 170, and let's even say we have 5 snow days this academic year, we would be at 165. And then we have 10 half days still in our calendar, which would drop us to about 160 instructional days. I know they're contractual, but when I think about the fact that they're being utilized in some cases for parent conferences, are we allowing parents into the building? If we're open, are we doing those parent conferences virtually? I'm just concerned already based on the pacing, and now we have the half-day situation. We live in New England. There's
Right,
the
and
potential
that's-
for snow days.
And that's an excellent.
Sarah, we're going to make up the snow days, though. Either way, snow day is made up anyway.
But after MCAS.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, true. So, I mean, these might be discussions that we should take into the planning group with the ELEA that's been meeting regularly and, continue to work through that because obviously there's a certain ratio, if you will, between the 180-day and the half days we've taken. And now we've reduced that by 10. So how should we look at that? But that might be a good discussion item to work through. Obviously, we want to have parent conferences, but one of the things that we also were introducing was that at the elementary level, the possibility of parent office hours. And so depending on what model we're in, there could be some redundancy there as well. And so that might be a very good discussion item to bring into that planning group.
Our first half day for parent conferences is October 21st. And if we were, let's say, a hybrid model, a teacher would potentially have met the child 10 times. So I'm just trying to put that into some context. It's not that I don't think parents and teachers should be communicating. That's not my point here. But after 10 interactions with a child, are we at a place where the parent conference is going to yield what we want it to yield? And if it isn't, then should we be looking at that student having a full day of instruction? Because a number of the half days do fall if we were to enter in a hybrid model on a Thursday or a Friday. So a child who was in a hybrid model would have a day and a half of instruction that week in an already very tight calendar. And that's concerning to me.
Right.
But I think, are we running into contractual issues though, Gordon, on that? Right now?
I think that's why I would bring this into the discussions
Yeah.
with the LEA planning group because, I think that certainly that's something that we need to discuss and shed some light on because we've changed the numbers. We've also changed, to a certain extent, how often we may be able to meet with parents, depending on the model. And so, those are all things that are new and we should probably discuss to figure out how that changes, at least in this year, the contractual language, if it does.
Right. Okay, we're going to need a motion to at least modify the start date for the calendar, please.
And can that be the motion? Can it just be for the start date? Because I don't want to approve this calendar as it is.
Most of the calendar we've already approved, I believe.
But now the situation to the same point has changed. Now we're not operating under the same situation.
But I don't think we're going to contractually. We can't change those half days right now. I know, Sarah, that as much as I am with you on this one. We've talked about this, but here and now, there's nothing we can do about it, and so we have to maximize what we have, I guess.
Although I would take it into our discussions.
Sure.
I think it's worth letting ELEA know what our feelings are as far as the half days go. But to Greg's point, it's contractual and we're kind of bound by it right now.
Because they are getting, 2 full weeks of really prep, which I understand we need, that perhaps might make up for students in the classroom time, to Sarah's point.
And part of that time could be used as an orientation for families, meeting the families ahead of the students actually starting class. Having an introduction of Family Academy where you're saying, these are my expectations during the days when we're remote. These are the expectations in terms of when students are in the classroom. And that might be a nice bridge, again, to your point around relationship building. I think there's a lot of options there.
And I think we'll find that our elementary class, our elementary teachers are doing some of that already, and thinking about how they're going to approach the new school year and how we do this in whatever model we ultimately decide to go with.
That's what my point was going to be. It'll all fit depending on what model we ultimately go with.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up probably like at our next meeting when we were discussing it, but I think that there needs to almost be a contract of sorts that are sent out to the families that they sign off on. I think that it's very important that they need to understand that, to the best of their abilities, if our kids are not going to be in school for certain days of the week, the kids have to have a quiet place where they can do their work. And when they're on a meeting with the rest of the class, we had kids bouncing on beds and showing us their dogs and cats, and parents are feeding their students, their kids breakfast, which I get, we don't want them to be hungry, but get up 5 minutes earlier. Or, I think that there needs to be expectations on the part of our parents. And I get that it is just going to be a ridiculous, crazy year for everybody. But I think that the kids need to know that they have a solid spot to sit, that it's not a spot that's got a TV set on in the background, and to the best of a family's ability. And I think something's got to go out along those lines and needs to get signed off on. Just a thought.
Okay, looking for that motion to modify the start date on the calendar, please.
Supposed to be the 16th. I move to start the school year for the 2020-2021 on the 16th of September.
For students.
For students, sorry.
Thank you,
And
perfect.
staff will be back on August 31st.
Perfect. Motion has been made by Beth.
I'll second.
Seconded by Bill. Discussion.
I'm just going to say that I voted no on the calendar the first time, so I can't fundamentally now say that I'm agreeing to it, even though it's just about the start date.
Okay.
Okay. And just to reiterate, this is due to the change in requirement from 180 days to 170 days. It gives the staff an additional 10 days to plan for this change. Just want to acknowledge all the work that the staff has done over the summer and will continue to do. Gordon, I know this has been a tough meeting, a lot of questions, good questions by this committee. Clearly, it's evident of the importance of this decision, and it all comes together in all the hard work that's happened over this summer and will continue to happen. So with that, I'll take a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
That carries 4-1. Okay, and that'll bring us to the end of the meeting. We're gonna plan to meet 6 o'clock on this Thursday, and as we said prior, we need to have a decision made by a week from today. So hopefully we'll have all that information compiled by Thursday, and we can move forward from there. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all. Excellent meeting. Good
Thank
questions,
you.
good discussion, a lot of hard work. It certainly shows to the gravity of the situation. This is, in my 10, 12 years on this committee, certainly the most difficult subject and topic that we've had to discuss. And again, our whole committee acknowledges the work done by Gordon, you and the staff.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all you've done to get us this far. Still a lot more work to do, but we have all the faith in the world that we're going to provide the best quality education that we can do for the students, and that's job number one. And I know we're focused on that. So
we certainly appreciate all of your help and support, and we'll work to provide a panel for you on Thursday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll take a motion to adjourn then, please.
So moved.
Motion by Bill,
I'll second.
second by Beth. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Hey,
Those opposed, nay. That carries 5-0. Thank you all for your time this
thank
evening.
you.
And for all those that chimed in as well. Thank you.